Horizon Thunder Sphere!
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the pre-stream. This is when I have a lot of extra time before a topic and don't need as much prep. And so sometimes I'm ready to go. In this particular case today, I was able to finish up my work, take the dogs for a walk, get something to eat. So, why not get on a little early? Plus, today is one of those days where I've got a lot of points to prove. There's going to be a lot of tangents. And, I said, jokingly, I said there's like 17, I was like in this 17-part essay in the notes in the doobly-doo down below, but I typed up like a notepad and document. I have like 24 items at least minimum. So yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this. Oh, anonymous.
Anonymous tipped $3. As
Claim
a
it.
man who detests all version of I am excited for this stream.
I don't know why I didn't like that 3.x. All right, so as a man who detests all versions of 3.x. All right, well, you know what, anonymous, we'll try to convince you of the error of the ways. No, I mean, look, there are a lot of reasons to not like third edition. I'll be completely honest with you for that. And we'll get into that. I mean, this is kind of really talking about the main differences between 3.0 and 3.5 and Pathfinder 1, but overall it's more of just like a tonal change, and we'll get into it when we get into this. So yeah, so anyways, this is just the pre-stream. Anyways, anonymous, I don't know if you want to claim who you were, but go for it. But thank you for getting off to starting us off right. Thanks, Moxie. Appreciate it. Dr. Metropolis. All right. Thank you, Dr. Metropolis. I haven't seen you in a while, Doc. Nice to see you. I still get a kick every time I see Dr. Metropolis. It's one of the coolest superhero concepts of all time. Very cool. Kalamakis says, I miss my diplomacy plus 56. Yes, the Diplomancer build, as we used to like to call it. Those 5-rank skill synergies were quite the stacking thing for diplomacy. And we'll get into that again, about why, in some cases, I think that this is actually a good thing. Again, you could argue that it isn't as much. But anyways, we're here for the pre-stream, so this is just our chance to just kind of hang out and talk and chat and ask questions or whatever. Dan, who was in the stream real early, said, I am not on the Patreon, but I'm considering it for Dragontide. What is the ETA on that? Great question. So, just sort of understand what this is, if you're not familiar with that. Knights of the Last Call for the last 3 years has run a big, huge community Pathfinder 2 game, and normally it starts in the spring. And so Season 1, Season 2 were the last couple of years. Season 3 was supposed to start this year in the spring. It did not. It got delayed, and we ended up launching a sort of variant of it, a version of it that we're calling Southern Beaches, sort of the opposite of Northern Reaches. It's just it's a very fun-focused game. It doesn't have the kind of gritty, grinding seriousness that Northern Reaches sometimes was known for having. Really leaning into the fun and fun and frantic elements, mirth and mayhem, you might almost call it. And it's going really, really well. However, before Southern Beaches launched, I had this idea of, well, what about another game? And maybe not everybody in our channel and everybody in our Discord likes Pathfinder 2. What if we did something with a game that everybody seems to be really jamming on? And a lot of people have been really enjoying Dragonbane. And so we thought, okay, let's try to make a community game for people who want something that isn't as rules complex and rules heavy as Dragonbane, as Pathfinder 2. Dragonbane really fits the bill for that really well. And so we came up with this idea of Dragontide, and then we said, you know what? All right, well, before we get Dragontide done, we need to get Southern Beaches launched. So Southern Beaches launched about 6 weeks ago, so it's going really well. However, about 6 weeks ago, I also kind of started having a lot of panic attacks and some anxiety issues, and I kind of got shut out of commission. So basically nothing got done with Dragontide. However, we talked about it this summer. I'd like to think that we could get Dragontide launched before the end of the year. But Dan, when we do launch it, I'll let you know, and you can feel free to join on at that time. Pathfinder PhD D&D 3 was my first edition. So much fun. Yeah, a lot of people. Third edition at the time was like. Third edition was like the fifth edition of D&D. I could never conceptualize that 5e would be so popular, but it was huge. Everything was D20. It was crazy. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, try not to cross the streams. Dan says the music played early scared him. Sorry. Okay. Now I'll when I go Horizon Thundersphere, I'll tone it down a little bit. Is this a TED Talk? It is not. At least not yet. It will be. Nice. Very cool. Nice, Dr. Metro. Sidon, yep, we got the pre-stream going. I just realized I never checked whether there's a Fortress America sim for TTS. If there is, we should totally play and even get a tournament with brackets going in the Discord. Well, I mean, Mike, if I'm going to start playing games on, Game Master Series games on TTS, I mean, it's got to. I mean, I love Samurai Swords. I love that game so much. Shogun or whatever you want to call it, but Samurai Swords is awesome. I love Axis and Allies too, but I played Axis and Allies a lot. And you would volunteer to put that together. All right. I didn't realize you were such a big Fortress America fan. Again, I've only played it I've never owned it, so I've only played it once. Also, somebody pointed out to me there was a fifth game in the Game Master Series that I didn't even know about, called Conquest of the Empire. It was like a Roman game. I didn't even know that one existed. So, how can an edition with Pun Pun be the best? Well, see, you're looking for Pun Pun in 3.5. And this is not 3.5. We're talking about 3.0. And we could talk about Pun Pun and why, in some ways, Pun Pun isn't a problem if in a certain way of looking at it. Only 3.0 I played was Wheel of Time. Damn, London. It's a deep cut. I think we got that one right here. This one. And this is a cool game. I like how they did channeling for the most part in here. Cool art in here too. Good book. Alrighty. Third edition was my first as well. I stuck around despite loving being a fighter and a ranger. Yeah, third edition, so third edition, it came out right as I was finishing high school. So, as soon as I was in college, I was on my own, and my friends had, their own apartments, and we could hang out and play D&D, on our own. So third edition to me has a lot of strong memories of just, kind of coming into my own and really taking, so there's a lot of mixed emotions when it comes to the edition. When 3.5 came out, I remember leaving third edition in the dust. I did start with AD&D second edition though, but barely, only 2 campaigns of it. Yeah, so I mean, I grew up playing AD&D second edition primarily, from about age 10 to about age 18 when we switched over to 3.0. And then when 3.5 came out in 2003, I'm not going to lie, we bought it, we picked it up, and we played it because at that time we were in this mindset of, well, this is the game, this is what's out, so we have to play it. But even at that time, there were a lot of things about the changeover that we didn't like. And by the time we got to Pathfinder 1, there was even like house rules that we had brought in that sort of brought back some of those elements from 3.0 because we liked them so much. Rem's first edition of D&D was D20 Modern. We got that one too. D20 Modern, I mean, this was like quintessential D20. The one cool thing, the thing that I did like about D20 Modern, which I thought was kind of a cool way, is there's only 6 core-based classes. And basically a strength class, a dex class, a con class, an int class, a whiz class, and a charisma class. It's kind of cool the way that they did it. So I thought that was always kind of cool. But yeah, again, I've said before, I'm not a huge. Who did the? Let's see here, primary design. Bill Slavicsek, Charles Ryan, Jeff Grubb. Yeah, the strong hero, the fast hero, the tough hero, the smart hero, the dedicated hero, the charismatic hero. It's like that's actually pretty good, and I think that really works well for like the modern framework and concept. That being said, not a huge fan of D20 modern because I don't like modern. I don't like modern day RPGs as much. I will say the one that I almost ended up playing. I always thought, because I grew up, I was huge on the X-Files. Heyo, thank you, Lollipop.
Lollipop Candy tip $25. Just dropping by for some moral support. I hope things get better for you soon and that you'll get to play/run more RPGs with your friends.
Yeah, Lolly. Again, we're in the pre-stream, so I don't want to completely shit on everybody's parade. But thank you so much for that. I started taking an SSRI about 3 weeks ago, and the first 2 weeks were absolute unbelievable hell. I had to cancel some streams. It was very difficult for me to get much done at work. Focusing, very difficult. There were a lot of days where I kind of just I would just pace around my house because I just couldn't do anything else. However, the last couple of days have actually been pretty good. And I have felt fairly normal. And I was told that this is kind of part of the expectation is that when you get on these meds, the first couple of weeks can be crazy, even worse than it was before because of the changing in your brain and your blood chemistry. And then your body starts to adjust to it. So I'm still sort of trying to figure that out. But I will say, I was able to get some work done today for my job, which is great. I was excited to be here with you all for the stream. Even got a little started a little bit early. And hopefully, some of my, maybe I didn't realize it, but, some of my unwillingness to run as more games this past year has maybe begun because I've been dealing with some of these issues that I just wasn't even, I wasn't even aware that I was dealing with these issues, but, my body was keeping the score, and then it was, boom, and then one day the dam broke, the levee broke. So, but thank you, Lollipop. I do think it's getting better. And again, everybody in the community has been really awesome and supportive. And I have no shame talking about it. Again, this isn't something I've ever dealt with in my whole life. So it's not like it's one of those things where I feel like I'm some sort of sudden advocate for it. It's mostly that I just don't think we should stigmatize anything about this, and we should not be afraid to talk about it and express ourselves and let other people know that it's common and that it happens. And, there's therapy and there's medications and there's definitely ways that you can, get better. Awesome. Well, there you go. Thank you, Crocodile. So what I was going to say is I never played it, never got around to playing it, but I did really toy around with the idea of running Dark Matter. I thought Dark Matter to me was like, this is about as Call of Cthulhu-esque as I'm going to get, but this is really more like X-Files. But this was a D20 modern campaign setting, which was originally designed for the Alternity game, which was a late TSR sort of generic modern sci-fi game system. I don't know if you guys have ever even heard of Alternity. Do I have an Alternity book? I do. Yeah, so this was Alternity. So this came out 1998. Yeah, so this is near the end, the death throes of TSR. So not many people knew this, but they released a campaign setting for this called Dark Matter, which of course was, this was 1998, 97. This was prime X-Files years. And then, of course, a couple years later, D20 comes out. It's huge. And so they remade the Dark Matter. Now, I never had the Dark Matter campaign setting for Alternity, but I did have it for D20 Modern. And again, pretty thin book, but it's a cool campaign setting, and you basically belong to a secret government clandestine organization that investigates paranormal happenings and, supernatural conspiracy theories and, aliens and monsters of the week and, all that fun stuff. I just thought that sounded pretty cool. Let's see here. London played some D20 Modern as well. Yeah, I never played Spycraft, but like I know GM Scott was a huge Spycraft Fantasy Craft fan. There was also like True 20 and there's a bunch of other stuff. Yeah, I can't speak. I never actually played D20 Modern, so I can't actually speak if the Dex Hero was broken. Well, that's funny. Pathfinder PhD. I played a fighter ranger that shared everything equally with his party and dual wielded a hammer and sickle. He went by Tommy the Commie. Still have his sheet somewhere. It sounds amazing. And that's like one of the first things that I think is kind of important about D&D, like 3rd edition, which is that it wasn't really balanced that well. I mean, it had a CR system and everything like that, but it wasn't really balanced that well. But the game kind of assumed that your character was going to make average decisions. Now, the problem as it is that people who are really into the game and they're super nerds and they're the advent of the internet and suddenly everybody's sharing all their builds with each other, that none of this ever existed before. Is when you build a game based around people making average decisions, then when people make good decisions and then they make more good decisions on top of good decisions, which then compound, and then they make more good decisions on top of those good decisions, they can start to become very, very, very powerful compared to this baseline expectation. And that means that you can have a wide disparity between power levels between different people in the same party. And it means that the standard monster math, even though I don't think it's particularly tight balanced, nothing like we would consider with Pathfinder 2nd edition in terms of balance. CR system is, a guess at best. But at the end of the day, that CR system doesn't mean a whole lot when you have somebody who's made just like super hyper optimal choices, and now they're suddenly extremely powerful. And what that means is that somebody can be a fighter ranger and wield a hammer and a sickle, and it doesn't matter because you're going to be okay because the game doesn't need you to be at the bleeding edge of optimization. And we take the opposite of this. We look at Pathfinder 2nd edition where, you basically have to have an 18. You have to have the max bonus, or otherwise what's the point of rolling? Like you're really, really punished for not being optimal. But the game makes it really easy to be optimal, right? So it got rid of the ivory tower, or rather maybe it kept the ivory tower, but it put an express elevator to the top, right? So that made it so that everybody can be the best, right? Again, I mean that there's pros and cons to that, certainly. Especially when you think about it from like a certain, demographics of your customer base and everything like that. And well, I mean, we can try to get into this. Again, there's a lot to get into here. Pause the 3D6 online play for Dolman for the free stream. Let's go. Glad there's some light in the trouble. Thank you, Mickey. I'm actually going to be kind of taking a little mini staycation this weekend. And for a day, I'm like getting I'm taking my dogs. I'm going out and I'm getting a cabin down by the lake and by a state park, just to kind of maybe try to unplug for a few days. We'll see. And I've been trying, I want to listen to some podcasts and watch some TV shows and watch some movies and just like, just relax and do some stuff. So, I've been hearing good things about this 3D6 down the line. Diomedes, why 3.0 EDD was better than 3.5? I love a good hot take. Excited for this one. Yeah, I mean, look, you will not agree with me. Not everyone will. I'm just saying that's fine, but I will give you my reason for that. Jason says the best edition of D&D. So this is about 4E, right? I'm in the minority there. I know. Well, Jason, I mean, I have a lot of 4th edition books, as you can tell from my bookshelf over here. I love 4th edition D&D. I think it's a great game system. And it is definitely the best version of D&D as a game. It is definitely the best version of really involved tactical combat as a game. It's very well balanced. It's probably the best balanced version of D&D that ever existed in terms of like combat as sport, or even just the game as a whole. I mean, I think it's great. And there's some really fun, flavorful abilities. They finally balanced casters and wizards, or casters and marshals. So a lot of the problems that people had with 3rd edition, they fixed in 4th edition, and people hated them for that. And then they went and played Pathfinder 1, which had all the same problems. And then they complained about them still, and it just boggled my mind. Anyways, Calamac has played some Star Wars D20. Yeah, we got that one too. Star Wars D20. Lightsabers were sick in this. This used like your con score was like your wounds, and like critical hits went directly to your con. I like that. I thought that was a cool system. And lightsabers were just brutal. Duncan does. We stand 4E here. Yes, we do love 4E here. I never played Starship Troopers D20. All right. Yes, Lollipop. It's the same thing that net decking, you know. And I don't think there's anything necessarily. I was never like this person who felt like net decking was some horrible crime against humanity. But I mean, it's definitely the same kind of phenomenon as well. Hey, what's up, Sims? What's going on? PF2E, assuming optimization does get a little grading. Exactly. You know, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, how can I put this? In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the only decision you can make is a bad one. Right? Like, because, I mean, so many of the decisions are just the same. And the only chance that you have is, like, for example, let's say that you're a character class who has heavy armor proficiency, and your character isn't wearing heavy armor, right? You're a paladin, you know, or sorry, champion. You're a champion. You're a fighter. Your dexterity is not great, but your character's in leather armor, you know, because, you know, your favorite character is Aragorn, you know, or, you know, your favorite character is, you know, Mad Mardigan from Willow, and he doesn't wear full plate, right? He wears like studded leather armor. And so you put your character in leather armor. You know, in some ways the game just doesn't work. It just, you have to assume that your character is either in full plate or with his no dex, or they have max dex and they're wearing leather armor, or they have like an intermediate dex and they're in some sort of medium armor. Like, there is no other room for that. And because of the extremely tight math of that game, if none of those are true, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. This is why talent-based systems are superior. I do like talent-based systems. Duncan says, I wish PF2 had skill points instead of proficiency tiers. You know, we can get into that. How much overlap is there, those who complain about 3.x and 4E? Are they the same people? No, I don't think so. Not at all. That's when you wear the heavy armor and flavor it as leather because it's not a sim game anyways. And I would argue at that point, what are we even doing here? You know, I got my start with 5e, so I always enjoy hearing about early editions. And Thaddeus, that's a really great point. As we go ahead and get started here, if I bring up something and I'm just speaking like I assume everyone knows what I'm talking about, please say something in chat, stop me, and we'll you know, make sure that we explain it so that we understand what's going on. All right.
And let's get ready to RPG!
RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG!
All right. Hello and good evening. Welcome to the Knights of Last Call. We've been in the pre-stream for about the last 20 minutes, but we are now here to talk about 3rd edition D&D. And no, not 3.5 edition D&D. No, the original 3.0 D&D. Now, this topic was sort of presented as one of the options from the Patreon poll. However, the patrons voted that I get to pick what the topic was for tonight, and I chose this one because it's something I've talked about in bits and pieces across many streams, and it just is something, quite frankly, that is easy for me to talk about because I you know, have so many thoughts and so many fond memories of this edition of Dungeons and Dragons. And for some of you, maybe you never even played 3rd edition D&D, and so we can kind of talk about some of the pros and the cons there. And there are cons. There's absolutely cons. And there are certain ones that I will call out. I'm sure others will bring up some as well. So, yeah. for tonight, we have fun tip goals, super chat goals if you prefer 3.5 or Pathfinder 1, or if you prefer 3.0. But if you put your money somewhere and it goes the wrong one, just let me know and I'll adjust it. But we'll see if I can get some converts in here before we get the night started. So as I said in the doobly-doo bound below, I was like, this is a 17-part essay. Well, it might be more than 17 parts, just because some of these are minor. Some of these are nitpicks, right, of the highest degree. Some of them are more fundamental and really, in my opinion, significantly changed the nature of the game. So with that in mind, let's go over to our screen. All right. All right. So what am I going to be talking about? Well, basically, I'm going to be talking about several different points or components of third edition D&D. And in some of the cases, these are things that were true generically throughout third edition. And by that, I mean D20. They were kind of true in third edition, 3.5, and Pathfinder 1. And then again, for those of you who don't know the difference here, right? So this is third edition D&D, which got retronymed to 3.0. This was released in 2000, and it was the start of the D20 system. All right, this is third edition. Next, so that's third edition. 3 years later, they released this. This is version 3.5, and it actually says 3.5 on the bottom. This was released in 2003 and is probably what most people have played, and many people consider this to be a cleaned up and revised version of third edition. I posit that some of the changes they made are not good, and actually make for a different and perhaps worse game experience. Then, kind of the spiritual successor to third edition, or 3.5 edition, is, of course, Pathfinder 1, which was released in 2001. 2009. And this, of course, was released by Paizo because they could no longer make things for fourth edition. They still wanted to keep publishing games, so they basically took the third edition game system. They made even more changes, and then went for that. Those book covers are pictures of real book covers made for the book. Yes. So someone actually carved this. I've seen the real carving. Somebody carved it. It's like a real book, but it's not like a book. It's like a sculpture, carved it. And then they took a really high-res photo of it, and that became the cover for the third edition Player's Handbook, which I thought was really cool. Yes, because the Pathfinder 1 core rulebook was quite the chunky behemoth. So it got a lot of love back in the day. So duct tape game on point. So real quick, I didn't want to turn me off. For those of you who don't know what a third edition character sheet looks like. So this is a third edition character sheet. This is a 3.0 D&D character sheet. And we've got, a lot of the stuff that we would basically come to expect here. We've got class, race, alignment, level, size, age, gender, height, weight, hair color, skin color. We've got our 6 ability scores with, scores range from 3 to 18 in the start of the game, with an ability modifier that uses, for the first time ever, the same set of ability modifiers. Remember, before this, in second edition D&D, each ability score had its own weird, unique table, and there were no universal modifiers. Third edition was the thing that introduced the idea of 16 is a +3, 18 is a +4. All right. So we have our hit points. We have our speed, initiative. So a lot of basic stuff that we're used to here for D&D. Now, if you've only played 5th edition, then fortitude, reflex, and will are also, new to you. And they were new for this edition as well. But of course, if you play Pathfinder, you know all about this. But these are the 3 saving throws: your body, the physical toughness of your body, your mental toughness, and then your agility, right? So that's fortitude, reflex, and will. And those were each associated with one of the 3 ability scores. And then we had a long list of skills. Now, there's some skills on here that may stand out as being a little bit crazy. For example, you have a skill for hide, but you also have a skill for move silently. They're two different skills, all right, in 3rd edition. Additionally, you have a skill for listening. You have a skill for spotting. And then you also have a skill for searching. And search uses intelligence. Spot and listen each use wisdom. Also, use rope is a is a skill, along with scry and alchemy. So 3rd edition introduced the idea of these skill lists, and it has pros and cons, right? Because in some ways it's told you what your character could do. In other ways it told you what your character can't do, right? And I think that's always kind of one of the big problems. But we can actually talk about why that isn't as much of a problem as you might think it is in second edition. Yes, there's also an innuendo skill. Like can you pick up what someone is saying? Like can you read the subtle subtext? And then we have armor, shield, weapons, and all the like. And on the back we have a space for gear. We've got a space for our special abilities and feats, and anything for our spells, and then our money, and then that's it. So pretty basic as far as things go. So, so again, I'm just trying to give you guys the basics of 3.0. I'm not going to try to explain everything about the edition. If there's a question you guys have, please ask, and I will try to answer it. All right. So the first reason. Now I'm going to start. Yes, and Pathfinder, that's a great point as well. The 3.0 3rd edition introduced the idea of feats. Before this, we never had anything like that. We never had, the idea of these kind of special abilities that you got when you leveled up. I should also point out that if you're used to playing PF1, in PF1 you got a feat at 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, etc. In 3rd edition, you got a feat at 1st level, 4th level, 7th, 10th, 13th, 16th, and 19th. And so, what that means is then if we, can continue the progression here, you end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You end up with 10 feats in Pathfinder 1, and you end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You only end up with 7 feats in 3rd edition. Now, humans got +1 feat, so that was pretty cool. But other than that, you didn't really get a lot of feats. And the feats that you got weren't really like all that amazing or special or cool. I mean, we thought they were cool when they came out in 2000, but they didn't like fundamentally shift the game in like too many ways. I mean, there were a couple that really gave you some cool options, but by and large, I mean, most of the time it was like, weapon focus gave you a +1 to hit with a certain type of weapon, right? Dodge gave you a +1 bonus to your armor class against a single foe. So, so it's like a +1 to hit. It's like a +1 to AC. It's stuff. Now, there were other classes that got some bonus feats. Fighter, foremost amongst them. But by and large, feats, while they were introduced, were not like this sort of all-encompassing thing that they became in later editions. So, anyways. All right, so now I'm going to start with what I'm going to call the nitpicks. All right, these are just minor stuff that in these cases, this is like a 3.0ism. But sometimes when we talk about strategic and long scale things, it might be just me talking about 3rd edition in general. But this is specifically a 3rd editionism. All right. No weird weapon sizes. All right. So what does that mean? Well, in 3rd edition, everything in the player's handbook was considered to be a medium-sized weapon. And this meant that a longsword was a medium-sized longsword, and a short sword was a medium-sized short sword. And the rules of the game were pretty simple. You had to be medium in order to wield it. However, if you were smaller, like let's say you were a halfling or you were a gnome, if you were a small character, instead of having your own weapon, you just used a one-handed medium weapon as a two-handed weapon. So that meant that a halfling, if the party found a long sword, let's say a magic long sword, well, the fighter could wield it, the human fighter could wield it as a one-handed D8 weapon. Or the halfling fighter could wield it as a two-handed weapon. So long sword just got to be used by everybody. Now, this may sound strange, like, wait, well, why do small characters do less damage? Well, small characters in 3rd edition D&D had some pretty significant advantages, and one of them being that they got a +1 to hit and a +1 armor class. So being small, definitely had some nice advantages. It has some disadvantages too, like you couldn't carry as much stuff. It was easier to grapple you, wrestle you, that kind of thing. 3.5 changed this. 3.5 introduced the idea of weapon sizes. And so in 3rd edition, you just had longswords. In 3.5, technically, you had small longswords, okay? And then you had medium longswords. And again, this might be kind of a moot point, but like, number one, in 3.5, if you use the random magical item generations, which again, it's a point I'll make about the edition of the game, but I will say this: 3rd edition is a very different game when you play it the way that you are supposed to play it. And the way you are supposed to play it is you are supposed to use random treasure generation. And you're not supposed to give your players carte blanche, all right, to buy anything they want out of the DMG. And that the magic items that they find, this is before 4th edition. 4th edition introduced this idea of the wish list, right? Which literally, it's called that. It's called that in the DMG in 4th edition, the wish list. It says, talk to your players, find out what are the 3 or 4 or 5 items, that they're most excited about, and find a way to put them into the next dungeon, right? Find a way to put them into the next adventure. No, none of this was true back in the third edition era. So when you And to be quite honest, if you just gave your players whatever they wanted and then you let them buy from town whatever items they want, your characters will be broken. Like flat out, just flat out. They'll be broken because you can pick and choose and optimize and pick every little nickel and dime, every little bonus. Oh, I got the amulet of natural armor. I've got the ring of protection. I've got the, yada, 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 yada. And they can do that. But if you use random items, it becomes very different. Well, we used random items. And when you got to 3.5, there was a % chance that when you found a longsword, it could be small, it could be medium, it could even be large. And each of these longswords had different damage types, and each of these longswords could be used by somebody else that wasn't the right size, but then you got a -2 penalty to your attack roll. I just always felt it was weird and cumbersome, and it was just a lot of rules for not a lot of benefit. I didn't really understand why they did it. And I think ultimately the reason that they did it is because they wanted halflings to be able to wield a longsword in one hand, right? And, it was kind of like, well, okay, but just have them wield something that isn't a medium-sized weapon. Have them wield like a short sword in one hand. And, so, they wield a short sword and the humans wield a long sword. That's D8 and D6, boom, done. But people were like not happy with that. And they wanted everybody to be able to have a long sword in their hand. And so they made up these rules, but the problem is if you were using random magical item rules, you might finally get a longsword. It's not even the right size for you. And that's not something you can just like, oh, I take it to the smithy and they fix it. No, it's just terrible. It's horrible. As a side note, this is kind of a tangent of number 1, so it's not actually number 2. But the other thing was when you created random magical items in 3rd edition, let me pull it up. Let me pull it up so we can take a look at what we're talking about here. Again, I told you this one's going to go all over. For sure. Okay. Monsters of Treasure. Here we go. Okay. Sorry, I got to find my... Here we go. Okay, here we go. Cool. I'll look up. I'll go to the weapons. I'm in the armor right now. Okay. So again, this talks about this really highlights how randomness can affect the outcome of the game. All right. So if we let somebody go and get some crazy, ridiculous item, okay, I don't know, some, crazy specialist spiked chain, right? Gnomish flick mace. Gnomish flick mace didn't exist at this time. But when a magical item was found, for starters, there was a percent, you had to roll percent chance. But let's say that we got a weapon. Well, then we would roll D percentage. And 70% of the time, okay, it was a common melee weapon from table 812. 10% of the time, it was an uncommon weapon. And 20% of the time, it was a common ranged weapon. All right. So right off the bat, okay, this game is giving a bias to people who use common melee weapons. Let's further take a look at this common melee weapons table. You can see that something like a dagger occurs 4% of the time. A great axe appears about 10% of the time. A great sword, 10% of the time. And a long sword occurs a whopping like 12 or 13% of the time. You are statistically more likely to get a long sword or a great sword or a great axe, okay, than you are to get a Shang Ham, okay, or a magical short spear. Now, why? Because swords are cool. When you see art on the cover of your favorite fantasy novels, okay, what are the people wielding? They're wielding swords and they're wielding big axes, okay? They're not wielding, scimitars or rapiers. I mean, I guess Dritz is one exception to that. But really to point it out for this, you only have a 10%, that you have a 70% chance of getting onto this table. You have a 10% chance of getting onto this table. And here's all these dumb, crazy weapons that, these, people who want to use, right? Like, oh, I want to use a dire flail. Okay, go for it. But I'm promising you, you're not going to find this as a magical item unless I specifically put it there. But you can start to see how games become broken when people just kowtow to whatever people have. It doesn't matter what weapon I'm using because the GM's just going to put whatever I want into the dungeon. All right. So this random magical item determination, and not only the random magical item, but the random type of item meant that you were, predisposed to use certain generic items because they were more likely to come up. And sure, your character could go and, and to be fair, to be 100% clear, this was not a game, 3rd edition was not a game that, you needed to be at this max level of bonus. Otherwise the game didn't function. It didn't. If somebody in your party had a +4 longsword and you only had like a +2 glaive, were you just like completely fucked? No, you weren't. Like, you were fine. You were 2 less points than them. I know, but 2 less points is a huge number. Kind of not. We can talk about that as well as part of the 3rd edition. It's part of my flat math, but numbers go burr logic. And we'll talk about that. And again, if I say something or something that everybody wants more context on, let me know. All right. So again, I'm starting with the nitpicks here, but the first thing is these weird weapon sizes. So we got rid of these weird weapon sizes. All right. All right. Number two. Let me delete this one here. So no weapon size issue. Okay. All right. No pokey mounts. Okay. Again, I said some of these are very specific. Okay. I have played Paladins. I played Paladins Pathfinder 1. They were broken as shit. They were like probably one of the most broken classes of all time. And I played quite a few of them in Pathfinder 1. And I like Paladins. I always have. However, in 3rd edition, in keeping with the traditions of the game, a Paladin, once they reached a certain level, received as part of their divine bond, right, this celestial mount, this special bonded mount. And I like to think that there's maybe elements there of Shadowfax and Gandalf. But this was like a real horse. It was a celestial gift, right? It was this, it was a real thing. But in 3.5, they got rid of that. And instead, your horse was like a Pokemon. Okay. And your horse, literally, you could just like, Celestial Mount, I choose you. And it would like pop out of like an extra dimensional space and be like, so that you could ride it for a while and then ship it back. But the stupidest problem of all time, is that it was still the duration that you could keep the horse out was still based off of your level, which meant that when you finally got, you're not that high level when you get the mount. I think you might be like level 4. When you get the mount, you can't even keep it out long enough to like ride it all day. It's completely dumb. It's the stupidest thing. Let's take a look here. Let's see if we can find it here real quick. Paladins. Okay, here we go. Paladins. All right. All right, here we go. So at 5th level, you gain the services of an unusually intelligent, strong, and loyal steed. This is 3.5, by the way. Once per day, so you can summon it once per day. As a full round action, you may magically call your mount from the celestial realms in which it resides. The mount immediately appears and remains for 2 hours per paladin level. So when you get this at level 5, it will be here for 10 hours. So not even enough for you to have it all day. In fact, you can't even have it all day until you reach level 12. Like, that's not my idea of my special mount, like my companion. Like, it's crazy that it just, again, it just appears. And of course, by the way, the mount also appears wearing or carrying any gear it was last dismissed, including barding, saddle, and saddlebags. What does this mean? It meant that most people turned their paladin mount essentially into like a portable storage container. And it just completely shit on everything that was cool about the paladin's mount. And I was just never a fan of that. So big L for me there. So no Pokemounts for paladins in 3.0. Much better, much better than that. And again, we're starting with the nitpick stuff. All right. Let me see here. Okay, paladin Pokemons. All right. Number 3. This is again just endless nitpicks. Okay, Rangers in 3.5 had D8 hit dice. Vomit. A ranger is a wilderness warrior. In some ways, they're supposed to be tougher than the other characters. But the ranger had just gotten pushed more and more and more and more into this role as this like light skirmisher, and everybody wanted it to be like Dritz, right? Or like an archer type character. And again, in 3rd edition, you basically had 2 options for your ranger. You could be a bow build, or you could be a 2-weapon fighter build. To be honest with you, I hate that. Ranger in 3rd edition is one of my least favorite classes. And it's not because people go, because it's front heavy and you can stack it or whatever. It was complete, and for me, it was complete betrayal of what the character was from 1st edition and 2nd edition. We've talked about this when we talked about the Ranger and how, it got co-opted by Dritz and all this other stuff. Now, what's interesting about this is that in 1st edition AD&D, Rangers had D8 hit points, but they started in AD&D 1st edition with 2D8. So Rangers, while they did have D8 hit points, they started with a whole extra hit die over all the other character classes, which meant that they were hardier than even the fighter, because the fighter was going to roll a D10. The Ranger was rolling 2D8. That's on average 4 points, 4.5 points higher. I know, Dritz is a fighter. It's insane. I mean, he becomes a ranger much later on, but Dritz's ability to do wield 2-weapon fight was because he was raised in Menzoberranzan, trained by Zaknafine because of his high dexterity, 2 hands, and he went to Melee Magaroth and he learned how to use the 2 scimitars as a fighter. There was no ranger until book 3, Sojourn, where he met Mushi. So when 3rd edition came out, when 3.5 edition came out, we were just like flabbergasted. Like, what? Rangers have D8? No, like Rangers are just, they're these tough, hard as nail characters. What's even more crazy about this is they let me pull pull up the character sheet here, or the class. They changed them to D8 hit dice, but then they gave them, this was new in 3.5, at 3rd level, they gave them endurance as a bonus feat. And endurance was a feat that like gave you a bonus to like, force marching and like, going without sleep. So they were like, yeah, these Rangers, they are tough as nails. They are, gritty and determined, like they can persevere and weather through. Then why'd you make them D8 hit dice? It never made any sense to me. So very silly. All right. So Rangers 3.5 D8 hit dice was horrible. All right. Let me see if I have any more super nitpicks. This isn't really a nitpick. Well, I mean, we're starting to get out of the nitpicks maybe a little bit here. We're starting to get into some of the more specific stuff. All right. Number 4. All right. Ranged combat was tough. Now, this may sound strange, but I am of the belief that ranged combat is one of the big advantages that most parties have against most of the foes that you fight. Most of the monsters that you fight, most of the evil humanoids, the monstrous humanoids, the giants, the magical beasts, the aberrations, the oozes, most of the things that you fight in D&D do not have ranged weaponry. Okay? And this was still at a time and a place where D&D campaigns could and would happen outdoors. And I can, there are many instances where I could think of where we would use the random encounter distances that were provided in 3rd edition. And, if you were outside in the plains or in the rolling hills, the starting distance of the encounter was randomly rolled. And it could be something like 200 feet or 300 feet. So being able to shoot at those distances gave you a lot of advantage. However, the fact of the matter is shooting a bow in a swirling melee in a barely lit dungeon room full of your allies and pillars and bad guys leaping out of shadows is really tough. And while this was still somewhat true in 3rd edition, 3.5 as well, it specifically to 3.0 as it goes into PF1, you got when you shot a bow, you got a -4 penalty to your attack roll if you shot into melee. Okay? So that meant that your attack bonus was down by 4. However, frequently you also had one of your allies in the way. The classic example, right, would be like, the monster's here, your ally is here fighting him, and your ranged character is back here, safely protected behind your ally, right? Well, in this case, my ranged character is shooting into melee, so I'm going to get a -4 penalty to my attack roll. But that monster also has 50% or half cover. And half cover was worth a whopping +4 to their armor class. All right. So this means that you're essentially at -8 in order to be able to shoot into combat. All right. It is not a great idea. Now, some of this was true in 3.5 edition. So why am I bringing it up? I'm bringing it up because of one very specific rule. Let me see if I can find it really quick here. Let's see if we can find it. Here we go. Oh, can't believe I found it. All right. All right. So here, by the way, this is an example of cover. We got 3/4 cover, 9/10 cover, half cover. Striking the cover instead of a missed target. Now, is this fiddly? Yes. And look, I'm not going to try to lie here that this game is super hyper simulationist. It was definitely more simulationist than 4th edition, and it included these things. But I just want to point out that these things did come in. Okay, so if it ever becomes important to know whether the cover was actually struck by an incoming attack that misses the target, the DM should determine if the attack roll would have hit the protected target without the cover. If the attack roll falls within a range low enough to miss the target, but high enough to strike the target, then the object used for cover was struck. In other words, if you missed that monster, okay, because of the cover bonus, then you shoot your friend in the back. Now, of course, your friend might have a really high armor class and your attack roll might not be high enough to actually hit them. So it hits them in the back and then bounces off of their armor. That's no problem. But what it means is that when you're shooting into melee, you can cause friendly fire, all right? And you can, you know, hit your allies. And that's, you know, that's a big deal, right? So again, you know, ranged combat was really tough to deal with. And so, okay, so then why was it, well, it was still very powerful because monsters didn't have it. So what does it mean? It meant you actually had to, I don't know, play smart. You had to move around. You had to think about your lines of sight. You had to calculate where your allies were going to be. You needed to decide, like, I need to sweep to the flank so that I have a shot that doesn't give that character cover, right? Or at least reduces the cover from half to fourth or whatever, right? You needed to decide, I'm going to select foes that aren't in melee with my allies because then I don't have the penalty to hit them, right? People are mentioning as well, you know, so-called, you know, feat taxes. And I hesitate to call these feat taxes because, again, these things were, you know, easy to sort of ignore. But, you know, you mentioned point blank shot and precise shot. And precise shot would get rid of this -4. But precise shot required you to take point blank shot first. So, you know, there weren't many characters that could have these two feats, you know, like a human could, but, you know, like or a fighter could, but every other character class and race combination had to wait till they were like level 4 just to get these two feats. And so, you know, I think that ranged combat was very powerful, but I think it kind of led to a more tactical game. And I think it wasn't just like fire and forget. And, you know, I remember especially when we went to 4th edition D&D, right, where, you know, you used your dexterity for everything for your ranged attack, including your damage. And there was no, you know, penalty for shooting into melee. And like, you know, the ranger, you know, the range characters would just, it felt like DPS from WoW, right? Where you have just like this arc of, you know, casters and ranged casters and hunters that are all just like in this big arc, just this a constant stream of DPS. You know, okay, cool. But I think it's more interesting when, you know, the characters have to sort of, you know, move around and be tactical. I think that's kind of interesting. All right. So that's number 4. All right. Number 5. And again, I'm these are like nitpick type things. Some of these are true for 3rd edition in general. But, you know, but I'll try to focus on 3.0 specifically. All right. Damage reduction. No golf bags. All right. So what does this mean? Okay. D&D had in AD&D in 1st and 2nd edition had a tradition of monsters that required you to have a certain level of magical item to even be able to hit them. Most famously, things like vampires, incorporeal undead, and golems required things like a +1 or a +2, or even in some cases a +3 item in order to be able to hit them. In other words, you needed, if you didn't have a +3 longsword in AD&D 2nd edition, you couldn't even attack a golem in melee. Your weapon was useless. You could have a +2 sword, but your weapon was useless. All right? You needed a +3 weapon. But remember that this was a game, this was a time and a place, and I'm kind of getting ahead of myself because I'm going to talk about this, but you didn't need these magical item the bonus didn't matter. Right? When we think about magic items now, all we think about is the bonus. All we think about is like another bonus to attack, 5% more hit, keeping me on pace. And then in the case of modern day RPGs, right, it's baked in. You need to have this weapon, otherwise you're behind the curve and your damage is not expected. But at this time in this place, in earlier versions of the game, these bonuses or these values meant that getting getting a higher potency magical item, like a +2 or +3, wasn't just about getting another +1 to hit. It really felt like a more powerful weapon because it allowed you to hit these creatures. Well, in 3rd edition, they introduced the idea of damage reduction. And so they took this concept and they applied it, but across a larger number of creatures. And they introduced this even at low levels. And one of the classic examples is the Grick. Okay. And the Grick is this weird, like, aberration monster with like a beak, and it had damage reduction 10/+1. And you fought this thing fairly early when you might not have a +1 weapon. And that meant that if you hit a Grick, it took 10 points of damage off every attack unless you had a +1. Now, there were still monsters like the Golem. Okay. And the Golem had something crazy. Like, I think it was 40. It might have been 40. 40/+3. Okay. And, I think the vampire might have been, +2 or something like that. Okay. I don't remember what their number was. So the point is, in 3rd edition, rather than just say they were immune to your attack, no, it was like they're going to take off a substantial amount of damage. And by and large, you did not want to fight these monsters if you did not have the magical bonus to fight them. And I know this is crazy, but the idea was not every monster is something that the party is going to be able to fight. And if a party encounters a golem and they don't have the ability to get to a +3 magical item, then those melee characters, are going to suck. Now, what did they do in 3.5? Well, in 3.5, instead of having these different levels of +1, +2, +3, all of the different damage reductions that were +1, +2, +3 just became like 10/magic. And all that meant is that you needed a magic weapon. So that meant that once you had a +1 weapon, you could hit that monster. All right. You could hit, the goal, you could hit the creature that used to need a +2 or a +3 weapon. Doesn't matter. You only need a +1 weapon. So basically, once you got your +1 weapon, which you got, fairly early in the game-ish, you were good. You never had to worry about hitting people with magic items again because they were, 10/magic. So that seems really lame, right? Well, it's even lamer than that because what they ended up doing is replacing a bunch of these damage reductions with shit like 10/adamantine, okay, and 15/cold iron, and I can't even remember, like 10/holy, and there was like 5 or 6 or other ones, right? So what ended up happening is if you wanted to do damage to these monsters, okay, you had to have what was called a golf bag, okay? And the idea was that a melee character had to just have like a bunch of different items, okay? I hit the oh yeah, silver, thank you. That's a good one. 5/silver. I forgot about silver. And so you just had to have this like huge bag of weapons and it was just like, whoosh, pull out my adamantine weapon for this monster, whoosh, pull out my cold iron weapon for this monster. It just felt weird and it was silly and it was stupid. But more importantly than that, going back, and I know, casters are the big evil, but, getting a +1 weapon was, not a trivial thing, right? It's not like you get it like at level 1 like you do nowadays. I mean, in fact, if we hop over, we can actually take a look here. PDF. Go. So if we go back to our magical item table, okay, we can see that if we roll a minor magical item, this is all depending on the monster's CR. If we roll a minor magical item, there is a 5, 6, 7, 8, not a 5% chance that we will get a weapon. And then we will roll on table 8-10. And then when we roll on table 8-10, we can see that 70% of the time we will get a +1 weapon bonus. And 15% of the time, we will get a +2 weapon bonus. And 15% of the time, we'll get a special ability, and we get to roll again. Now, let me tell you something, folks. I loved rolling my magical items. I loved letting my players roll them. Okay, like they were sort of like a quantum magical item. The chest had magic item in it. I just didn't know which one it was. And watching the players like sit there and like hope to go, because if they rolled like an 85, they just found a +2 sword. That's huge, right? And they could have found that, early on in the game. It was just random. Anyways, but the point is, you weren't necessarily guaranteed to have a +1 weapon or a +2 weapon, right? Or a +3 weapon, because it was random. You might not end up with one. Doo-doo. Hey, Duncan, what's up?
Duncan DT tipped $5. Sorry to interrupt, but how did terrain damage or falling damage interact with damage reduction?
Duncan, I'm pretty sure that it worked. I mean, like, if a golem fell off of a cliff and he took 100 falling damage, he would only take 60. I think the damage probably would be treated as bludgeoning for weapon purposes of getting through bludgeoning. But I'm pretty sure that was the way that worked. I don't know that they specifically call out exactly how that works. They might. I just don't know it. But I'm pretty sure that it's basically just damage reduction, period. Exactly. The pain of playing an archer in D&D 3E and never finding anything other than magical melee weapons. Yeah, the game had a bias towards cool swords and big flaming axes. The game was absolutely biased that way, and that's totally true. Okay, so going back to this. So where does the cool, where, in my opinion, now I think this is cool. Other people may not think this is cool, but I think this is really cool. And this gets to, the idea of support casters and all this other stuff. So getting a +1 weapon could potentially be something that is tough to get. Getting a +2 weapon or getting a +3 weapon could be really tough, right? I'm talking about a permanent +2 or +3 weapon. But here's the good news. You had casters, wizards, clerics, and they had access to spells like greater magic weapon. Okay. And greater magic weapon could make your weapon for a while +2. And then a couple, levels later, it could make your weapon a +3. And it could make your weapon a +4. In fact, in some ways, your character didn't even really need a +3 longsword if you had casters and wizards in your group, or, wizards and clerics in your group, because when it wasn't probably worth the money, or it wasn't worth trying to find this +1 bonus just to get 5% more accuracy on your attack roll. The only reason you really wanted the +3 or +4 was to get through the damage reduction. But you had casters who could cast those spells on your weapons. And so if they needed to, you could have that supercharged power. Now, I know what you're saying. So this puts a lot of reliance on the casters. No, and yes. I mean, the fact of the matter is it was a team game. And, in some ways, the wizard, the cleric, I mean, this was the star quarterback. They were the star quarterback. They were the star running back. They were the secret weapon. They were the artillery, right? And the fighters and the barbarians and stuff like that, right? That's the offensive line. That's the grunts. That's the infantry, right? They're there to let the tank do what the tank does. And without that, then that person gets in trouble, And so this idea of the casters being there to support and to enhance and to buff, I think was really, really a big part of 3rd edition. And I think a lot of people took this the wrong way, and they ended up taking their characters and buffing themselves over and over and over and over again. And I don't necessarily know that was the most optimal thing in the world to do, but it certainly made them feel cool. And one of the reasons we had such a good experience with 3rd edition is because our casters were typically very much thinking about the party rather than just themselves selfishly. And, maybe if you played with a bunch of assholes, or you played with what was called RPGA back then, or a Pathfinder Society, you might have had that problem. Let's see here. I've been really nostalgic lately for 3.x, but I'm not sure if I should pursue 3.0, 3.5, or Pathfinder 1. What say you, Derek? By the way, is it just me, or does 3.x seem simpler and easier to stay in the Pathfinder 2nd edition? There are definitely some places where 3rd edition can get stuck in the mud. I mean, I won't lie to that, for sure. 3.x is the most complex edition D&D ever made, and most of the complexity isn't worth the squeeze. Is it the most complex edition of D&D ever made? I don't know that is. I don't know. That's tough. It's more complicated than 5th edition. I'll say that. Yeah, I mean it's a toss up between that and 4th edition. But yeah, I like this idea of optimizing as a group, and I think that's a lot of fun. Okay, so golf bags was a problem. All right, so we've got no weird weapon sizes, no pokey mounts for paladins. Rangers had D8 hit die in 30.5. Range combat was tough. You had the chance to hit cover, including your allies. Damage reduction, no golf bags. All right, 6. All right, 3.5 was a blatant money grab, okay? Even Monty Cook said this at the time. Now, at this time, he wasn't working for Wizards, but he even said this, they had always planned, and this should come as no surprise, and we just saw D&D 2024 got released. At least, to be fair, they took 10 years to do it. Wizards of the Coast took a whopping 3. And so what happened? Well, Wizards of the Coast began to acquire TSR in circa 1998. And at that time, they knew that they wanted to release a new edition of Dungeons & Dragons. And they did. However, even when they were releasing Dungeons & Dragons, they were considering releasing a revision, a version of it. So what happened between 2000 and 2003? I'll tell you what happened. Wizards of the Coast was sold to Hasbro. And the fact of the matter is, core books sell really well. And so Hasbro said, sales have dropped. People aren't buying as many 3.0 books because it's been out for a couple of years. They own them. They don't need to go buy new books. This OGL thing is not maybe working out the way we wanted it to. Why don't you guys release that revision that you were planning? Okay. And we'll sell all the books again. Okay. And they did. And it worked. Okay. Because you had 3rd edition and then you had 3.5. We were showing earlier the different player handbooks, right? So it's like, oh, you bought this in 2000 and then you bought this in 2003, right? But it was even worse than that, right? Because you bought Sword and Fist, okay, which was a guidebook to fighters and monks. You bought this in 2000 or 2001. And by the way, this was a soft cover paperback. It was about this thin. It was actually pretty cheap, as I recall. I think it was like $15 or something like that. Well, guess what? 3 years later, 3.5 comes out. Hey, remember that book that you bought? Throw that away. Buy Complete Warrior. Oh, look, this is $27, and it's hardbacked, and it's a little bit thicker. It's full of even more classes, and even more feats, and even more splat, right? And they basically just reprinted every book that they printed before. I mean, I'm not even kidding. I mean, like, let's see here. Here is Tome and Blood, a guidebook to wizards and sorcerers. Again, Flappy 3.0. And then 4 years later, boom, Complete Arcane. And, it was crazy. It was nonsense. And they even released more of those for 3.5, which meant you had more splat, more prestige classes, more garbage, more crap. Horrible. So 3.5 was a blatant money grab. They said, "Oh, we're cleaning up the game," but they just picked weird things to change. Like people are like does changing the Ranger to D8 really change the game? Is moving? They get endurance now? Is that like such a huge change? Bards got 6 skill points instead of 4 skill points. Like it. Is that worth a whole new edition, a whole new book? Give Bards 2 more skill points a level? I don't think so. But yeah, so that's number 6 again. All right. Number 7. Oh yeah, I did this. This is more of a 3.0 thing, by the way, just a 3.x thing. Okay. But so this includes Pathfinder 1 as well, but you got to give it to 3.0. That's the one that, it came out with this. Flat-footed and touch ACs. This was such a cool, this is such a great thing. Such a great thing, that, they introduced to the game. And the idea basically was that, you had 3 kind of armor classes. So you had your armor class, when you were trying to defend and against the monster's attacks and stuff like that. That was your normal armor class. But you also had your flat-footed AC, and there were certain conditions and certain instances in the game where you would be flat-footed. And then in that case, you didn't get to add any of your dex or any of your dodge bonuses to your armor class, which meant catching someone by surprise or really messing someone was really powerful against these sort of really super nimble, tough, dodgy characters. So like your rogue or your monk. If they got caught flat-footed, they were in big trouble. However, that fighter in his heavy plate armor, if he got caught flat-footed, it didn't really matter that much because he wasn't really getting anything from his dexterity anyways. However, there was also this idea of your touch AC. And the touch AC was more like, what if the attack doesn't even need to hit you penetrate your armor? It just needs to actually get a hand on you. It just needs to touch you. Well, in that case, your big bulky armor doesn't help you at all. In fact, the only thing that matters is your ability to dodge and leap out of the way. So just like the rogue or the monk got kind of fucked by the flat-footed AC, the big heavily armored fighter got fucked by the touch AC. And this was true for monsters as well. And it meant that there was different ways to approach fighting. And it wasn't just everything gets spammed into just attack armor class. That's the only thing that you have to go. If you had a monster that had some obscene armor class, its touch AC, I'm not even kidding you, could be like 20 points lower. That's huge. And so if you have a way that you can exploit that, then you have a huge, huge advantage. We're starting to get to some of the elements here about 3rd edition, which I like, which is the strategic element of the game. Now, it's not without its problem. Look, kind of a sidebar, side tangent, okay? Spell harm in 3.0 was bad. It was a problem, okay? Because harm in 3rd edition, 3.0, was a touch, okay? Now, granted, your cleric is got to get into touch range with somebody, so I respect that. That's not a nothing. But harm had no saving throw, and it reduced an enemy to D4 hit points. Not did D4 damage, it reduced them to D4 hit points. And there was no save. And it was a touch. So, that big scary dragon, cleric just lays a hand on him, touches them, harms, they're down to D4 hit points. This was not good. And the reason why, this is just an example of a bad translation. Okay. Because in D&D, harm did the same exact thing, by the way, in AD&D, 2nd edition and 1st edition. Okay. Right. There was no saving throw for harm. The cleric had to hit the enemy, right, with a melee attack. And if they did, the enemy was reduced to D4 hit points. The difference is that in AD&D 1st and 2nd edition, there was no such thing. Okay. So as touch AC, right? Touch AC did not exist. So because touch AC didn't exist, it meant that when a cleric tried to go cast harm on a monster in AD&D 2nd edition, their armor class was still their armor class. I'm not saying it wasn't powerful. It was, but it meant that the cleric had to probably roll pretty high because they weren't like a great, they were okay at fighting. They weren't great at fighting. And so if there was this really powerful dragon with a really, high armor class, which would have been low back then, but the cleric was still going to have a hard time getting a hand on them and touching them. And then they would be reduced to D4 hit points. So they transferred that over to 3.0, and they were like, oh, and now that we have this touch AC concept, and now that's all you're doing with harm is you're just touching them, we'll just leave it, and then we'll make a touch. And it's like, yeah, but that doesn't work. that is completely broken. And so in 3.5, they made it so that you had to touch them, and then the target got to make a saving throw for half. And it did 10 damage per level. Now, to be fair, I didn't really love this either because it just turned harm into this damage spell. And we'll get to that as we get layer down about why I actually like 3.0 better. So anyways, I love flat-footed and touch ACs. I think these are really great. And these, by the way, were in Pathfinder 1 as well. Similarly, again, this is more of a 3.x thing. This was in flat. This was in Pathfinder. This was in the thing. So I did say there's some things here that are just kind of universal. I love taking 20. And for those of you who don't know what taking 20 means, it means we assume that your character rolls the die enough times that they eventually get 20. And then we figure you just say, I'm taking 20. And so if I'm picking the lock, what's your open lock skill? Plus 12. Great. You get a 32. What's the DC to find that secret door? 25. You're like, okay, I'm going to take 20. And you're like, okay, you take 20. What's your search? 8. You get a 28. You find all the secrets in this room, right? It is, number one, it makes complete sense. Number two, it just completely deals with it, but of the issue of people just spamming dice rolls. But here's the most important part. This is why it fails even in 3rd edition, because of some of the mistakes that were made. Taking 20 is highly dependent, okay? Highly dependent on time mattering. Because when you take 20, whatever you're going to do takes 20 times as long. So let's say you have a small sized room and someone wants to go and make a search check and they want to look at all the different walls. And you can quickly kind of figure out, you're like, that would take about maybe, 2 minutes to make a search check. Great. So the character goes in there, they look around, they say, I'm going to make a quick cursory examination. Now, of course, in AD&D 2nd edition and 1st edition, there was no search check. There was no perception roll. You had to describe what you wanted to do, and the GM had to play this game. And some people like that game. That's a fun game. You're still playing a game, but some people like that kind of GM pixel bitching. Did you say you were looking specifically at the corner? Because if you said you specifically look at the corner, I'll tell you that one of the stones is out of place. Look, that's fun, and there's an element to that. 3rd edition was obviously trying to put some of the emphasis onto the character and allow your character to be good at something. Rather than just the player, right? So this idea of PC versus player skill. Anyways, if it took 2 minutes to do a search check and the character, rolls, and GM would make that roll in secret, of course. And the GM says, you're not able to find anything. And someone says, look, we know there's got to be a secret door in here somewhere. I'm going to take 20. Is that everybody cool with that? And you go, yeah, it's going to take 20. That meant it's going to take 20 times as long, which meant it's going to take 40 minutes for you to take 20 and search this room basically top to bottom. And if time doesn't matter, then you're going to do that every single time and it's not going to matter. But if time does matter because of random encounters and because of deadlines and timelines, then this decision to take 20 or not becomes really important. And it becomes a useful, valuable tool. And it becomes part of the group's strategic management of resources, not least of which is time. And time might matter not only because of the negative consequences, right? You run out of time to stop the sacrifice of the princess. You trigger a bunch of random encounter rolls. But as we're about to get to here in a minute, that's also valuable time ticking away from your spells and from your buff spells. Okay? Which were also cool and important. Do you have any plans of possibly going over Player Core 2 for PF2E one day? Yes, actually, I do. The problem, CL, is this year, 2024, I have not played any Pathfinder 2. We finished up our Abomination Vaults campaign at the end of 2023, and then OGL stuff came out, and I was just like, okay, I'm not even thinking about Pathfinder 2 until everything is out and we have a complete game. And Player Core 2 came out, obviously, just this past summer. And so it's been out, for a couple months now. But I have not had the opportunity to really play those things. So this is one of those situations where I'm going to need to work with some of the people on my Discord, my patrons, who've been playing these classes a lot and have gotten some reps and are willing to maybe come and share their thoughts or maybe even get on the show. Because I don't want to be this person of just reading the description and going, oh, this probably is way better, when I haven't actually put in the reps and haven't put in the time, and in that regard. So, yeah. But I can tell you that, neither me nor Bob nor Smith have played with any of the Player Core, the sort of the revised Pathfinder, remastered stuff. Obviously, we have a lot of patrons who do. Southern Beaches, people are playing multiple games of Pathfinder 2 a week. They're going to have a much better understanding of what's going on for that. All right. Number 9. Somewhat controversial. Items. And by this I mean even your magic items. In 3.0 had less HP and hardness than 3.x, or I should say 3.5. Okay, so your items were frailer. Okay, they had less hit points, they had less hardness than 3.5. This meant not just your armor, your shield. I'm talking about all of your magical items. Why would that matter? Well, because Sunder existed, and Sunder let you target enemies' weapons or players' weapons and armor and shield. But also, if you rolled a nat 1 on a saving throw from something like a fireball or an acid arrow or whatever, what have you, there was a chance that, well, I mean, when you rolled a nat 1, it wasn't a chance. I mean, it was guaranteed. If you rolled a nat 1 on your saving throw, you had to roll on a table to see if some of your items got hit and damaged by that effect. So this meant that if someone nat 1'd on a fireball roll, not only could they take, not only are they going to take a bunch of damage, okay? You didn't take double back then, but what it meant is that one of your items might get destroyed. Your cloak, your magic robe, right? The wand that you're holding could all get destroyed by this fireball, which blew up in your face and you rolled a nat 1. Now, I'm not saying that destroying items was easy, but there was this less of this idea that items were this sort of sacrosanct thing, that the players needed these items to play. Now, I know that a lot of people felt that way because they got addicted to the just insane numbers, especially when the GMs were just, treating the DMG as if it was like a section in the player's handbook, go shopping, right? It's a shopping list. It's a Sears catalog. Dating myself there. But just letting the players find whatever they wanted to in the magic in the items. You bring up the rust monsters as well. I remember this was a huge moment for me, Derek, is when I first played 4th edition and I saw that they had rust monsters and I was really surprised. And then I saw that what rust monsters did is they destroyed the item and then it crumbled into residium, which was basically like powdered magical item dust, and you could sprinkle it back and make your items back, right? So, there was this idea that things were frailer and, the items themselves could be destroyed. And so I know that might sound harsh, but overall it meant that, the game didn't rely on that item. You needed to have that item as much. And it also meant that there was, kind of a risk. There was kind of a danger of stuff happening. All right. All right, number 10. Favored class / multi-class penalty. All right. Something that not a lot of people know about this. I don't know how people do not. I mean, maybe they do, but they don't. So in 3rd edition, much like 5th edition, D&D, every time you leveled up, you could take any class. Now, it might not make sense for you to take a class. You might not want to take Barbarian. You may not want to take, if your strength is really low. You might not want to take Wizard if your intelligence is really low. But when you leveled up, you could take whatever class you want. Now, in theory, this is a cool way to sort of represent your character's growth in the game. Not many people played it that way, but I always thought it was a really cool idea. One of my favorite, again, if you know Dritz, when the 3rd edition Forgotten Realms books came out, they showed that Dritz was like a fighter 9, barbarian 2, like ranger 6 or something. And part of the reason that this happens is because like he was raised to be a soldier in the army of House Duerden. Then he lived for a decade or so as like kind of a wild hunter in the Underdark. That's book 2, Exile, of the Dark Elf trilogy. And then he meets Mushi and he learns about being a ranger. And so his class progression sort of is like a way of telling his story, right? Which I always thought was kind of a really cool idea. However, as people are aware, and Dritz would have been aware, this can lead to problems, right? Because people will splash here, they'll dip here, they'll pick up this, they'll pick up that. And, to just pick up a level of this or pick up a level of that. Well, in 3.0, okay, if you were multi-classed, okay, and your classes that you were multi-classed in weren't close to each other in level, okay, you got a 20% up to a 40% XP penalty. Okay, so this, if you went and splashed a couple different levels of something, okay, great, you could do that. Your character is going to be at almost a 50% EXP penalty for the rest of the game until you bring those classes that you just dipped into up. And that to me was awesome because it meant that there was a disincentive to just sprinkle and pop this and take that and pop this. Now, each of the races had a favorite class. And the way that the favorite class worked is basically that class didn't count for purposes of your XP penalty. So, for example, fighters or dwarves had the favorite class fighter. So that meant that whatever their level was in fighter, we basically just kind of ignored it for determining what their XP penalty was. So a dwarf who was a fighter could take a level of barbarian and it wouldn't really count as an XP penalty because his fighter levels don't count. Humans they could pick one of their classes as favored class. So basically a human was very flexible and versatile, which made sense because elves and dwarves had all these powerful abilities and, dark vision and saving throw bonuses and long life. So humans needed something, right? And so humans could be very versatile. So could half elves, as a matter of fact. Elves were wizards. Half orcs were barbarian. So what this meant is that in 3.0, now of course in Pathfinder 1, favorite class was actually a carrot, right? It was, hey, if you put your class into this favored class, you get an extra bonus. You get an extra skill point. You get an extra hit point. But in 3rd edition, 3.0, it was a penalty. All right. And basically the favored class, the reward for the favored class was you don't get penalized. Like there was no reward. And so this to me was a great way to keep the sort of brokenness in check. But also too, I don't think there's anything wrong with somebody taking those, level dips and then paying the price for it. Great. You made your character really broken by dipping here and dipping there. Great. You're now at an XP penalty and the rest of the party is going to outlevel you. And maybe it was worth it. Maybe it wasn't. Now I know what you're saying. Like, well, then no one would ever do that. Okay. Well, then there you go. Problem solved. Then no one's going to be dipping. Right. And if somebody feels really passionate about it and they want to take that class, they can, and maybe that'll make their character really, powerful, but, they're going to suffer the XP penalty for it. And so I think that's really, really cool. John says this level rule is good. Multiclassing should demand levels be similar or you cop a penalty. Dips suck. Only committed multiclassing should be allowed. And I agree. And so like, as an example, one of our very early 3.0 characters is, Smith had a dwarf named, Rethgif, who just went by the name Reth. Most people called him Reth. I have to spell it backwards because Rethgif Cyrillic, okay, which is cleric fighter backwards, by the way. But he went by the name of Reth. And I think at the end of the campaign, Reth was a 13 cleric, 7 fighter. Okay. Normally, a character like this would be getting an XP penalty because these two levels are too far apart. But because he's a dwarf, dwarf's favored class is fighter, so we basically pretend like this doesn't exist, and the game only sees that he has 13 levels in cleric. And so no XP penalty is given. So this means that a dwarf can basically always kind of be a fighter, right? And that feels cool, right? Because like that's what dwarves are, Wizards or elves are wizards. And it kind of gave a mechanical incentive for characters of that to kind of pick up some levels in their class, their race's favorite class. And of course, humans could be anything, which made them very versatile, which felt, powerful, especially, like I said, because dwarves and elves and halflings had so many cool, powerful racial abilities that really made this made a big difference. So anyways, so I really like favorite class. All right. What number are we on? Number 11. Number 11. Okay. XP costs for magic item creation. On the other hand, the Bard in 3.0 practically begged to dip because their special abilities were tied only to perform skill and not to level. Yeah, I mean, there was still a problem of dipping, but Callimachus, if somebody dipped Bard and they didn't have, the right favorite classes, then they'd be getting a 20% XP penalty for the rest of the game. So, but I do agree that, some of the incentives to just like you said with the Bard in particular, is one that tying it to perform skill was probably not the best idea. So this was true in 3.5 as well as 3.0, but it was not true in Pathfinder 1, and it became a real problem in Pathfinder 1. In 3rd edition, unlike in the prior editions of the game, magical item creation was something that was pretty, quote unquote, easy to do. And you needed to take a feat, and different feats gave you the ability to make, some feats gave you the ability to make arms and armor. Some feats gave you the ability to make wands. Some feats gave you the ability to make staves and rods. But basically, there was a formula for the first time ever in the game for figuring out what a magical item should cost. We never had this before. Here we go. So, this is like a table. It's a rough, it applies for a lot of things, but it doesn't apply for everything. But basically, you could figure out the spell level times the caster level times 25 times 50 times 750 times 2000. If it was an ability bonus, it was the bonus squared times 1,000. So there was formulas in the DMG for how to make magical items and how to make your own magical items. And this, before D&D magic item creation was this like really crazy, long-winded, and I'll be honest with you, we played 2nd edition for a long time and no one ever made a magical item because it was crazy. So in 3rd edition, it became very, simple. No longer do you have to go on some epic quest. That may have its own problem, and I will concede that. But what you could do when you made a magic item is, if let's say a magic item was 10,000 gold. Well, if we're playing in a game where there's no magic item market and you can't just automatically find something, being able to make that item is pretty tempting. And to make it, you only need that. You need the special feat, the magical item creation feat, and you only need half the gold, 5,000 GP. You also need 1 day for every 1,000 gold in the base price. So this will also take us 10 days, and we need we can't be out in the middle of the wilderness. We need access to a town or things that we can work on stuff. However, this is, by the way, how Pathfinder 1 worked, and it was broken as shit because basically taking these feats, these magical item creation feats, basically doubled your amount of money you had. However, in addition to costing half the gold, it cost a 25th, in XP. So making this item cost us 5,000 GP, but it also cost us 40. 400 XP. So you can clearly see. Now, this is not a trivial amount, okay? 400 XP. I mean, you could easily see how making several magical items, you could potentially lose a session or 2 sessions worth of magical of experience. Wizards and sorcerers and clerics and all these people who are, especially clerics and wizards, were, easily the best magical item creators. especially wizards actually, because wizards got free bonus feats that they could use to take craft feats. Like it was a real cost. And so again, it gets back to this idea of the wizard and the cleric sort of being there for the party and being this sort of like, this is what I can contribute to the group. It's not just about me, instant death. My character is willing to be potentially lower level so that we could have these cool items. I also should be remiss. This has nothing to do with 3rd edition, but this time also is a thing, right? So if you're playing in a game where campaign time doesn't matter at all, then you should fully expect for your players to be like, yeah, we're going to take 75 days off and craft magical items and, make exactly what we want. And if there's no penalty and there's no consequence to them taking 75 days off, then why wouldn't they? Sure, there might be a massive XP penalty, but it still might be worth it. But if you have a game where the time does matter, okay, where the experience penalty is a real thing, then suddenly it becomes really scary. And, I'll kind of talk about this. Maybe I'll talk about this next. But I'll kind of go into 12 here, which is level loss from dying. So I've used this example before, and I'm going to try to get this right so that we can use the right numbers. So pardon me for a moment. But I've given this story before, but I kind of want to just really highlight here how this could go sideways on you. Where is our XP chart? I think it's in the starter classes. All right, here we go. Okay. So we can see here character level on the left and how much XP we need to be that level. Now, to cast 6th level spells, you need to have 55,000. To be 11th level, you need to have 55,000 experience points. My wizard, was really excited to be 11th level. Gave me access to a lot of spells that I had really been looking forward to for a long time. And I was really looking forward to it. So, my wizard, like everybody in my party, they had like 61,000 XP. Okay. But I was a wizard and I made a bunch of magical items. So I brought my character down to like 55,200 XP. Right. So again, my character is still, still, Jesus. Come on. There we go. All right. So my character is still level 11 because I'm above 55,000 XP, but I'm barely there. Right. Okay. Well, my wizard's currently, so this is the party. This is everybody else in my party. They're at 61,000. They're totally fine. I make a bunch of magical items. I go down to 55,200 XP. So this is Derek. This is me. Okay. This is, no, DMs are terrible because then you might think it's the DM. All right. Those are my initials. D. Melinda. Okay. That's me. That's my wizard. Then what happens is my familiar dies. And when your familiar dies in 3rd edition D&D, you lose experience points. So I lost like 500 XP, from my familiar dying. So that put me down to 54,700 XP, which now means my character is level 10. The next round, I die. I die at level 10. So when I get brought back to life, I get brought back to life at level 9. And when you get brought back to life after losing a level, you get brought back halfway between where, what level you were, which was 10, and what level you are, which is 9. So 36 and 45, right? So I get brought back halfway between those. So I go to, what's halfway between 36 and 45? Well, that's 9,000, so 4,500. So it's 40,500, right? So my character gets raised dead and goes to 40,500 XP. Okay? Look at that progression. The rest of my party, they're at 61,000. In the span of a couple rounds, now I made a choice. I made my magical items. I pimped that party out. I gave them all their sweet stuff. Okay. I spent, almost, I spent 4,800 XP on magic items, right? That was on me. Then my familiar died. Then I de-leveled. Then I died. Then I got raised. Then I got rezzed. And by getting rezzed, I lost a level. And so suddenly I'm 20,000 experience points behind the rest of my party. Now, you might think that was horrible and game-breaking and game-ending. It wasn't. We kept playing. And there's some, we'll get into this. This is actually a place where I think 3.5 has the advantage. Maybe I'll side tangent because that's not actually technically what this stream is supposed to be about. So one of the cool things about 3.5 is that in 3.5, XP is calculated per person. And in 3.0, XP is calculated based off of the party. And what this means is that if, let's say that you have 4 people in the party who are all level 9, and the party fights a CR 10, then in 3.0, in 3.0 and 3.5, this would be exactly the same. But what if you had one person who was level 7, and you had 4 people that were level 9? In fact, actually, I don't want to do complicated math, so I'm going to make it easier. Let's say you had 2 people that were level 9 and 2 people that were level 7. Well, in 3.0, you would say, okay, well, the average party level is 8. So we're going to calculate the experience as if your party level was 8 versus a CR 10, and we're going to award everybody that amount of experience. And what this means is that the people who are higher level actually get more experience points than they would, right? Because they should have been getting less experience points because they're level 9, but because the lower level, and the idea is that maybe, I don't know, you're doing more work because you're, having to shoulder the burden of these lower level PCs. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of it. In 3.5, they did it on an individual basis. And what that means is that the level 9 people would get less experience points because a CR10 wasn't that powerful to them. But the level 7 people would get a lot more experience because that monster was several challenge ratings above their level. And so that meant that lower level characters could catch up. It provided, now don't get me wrong, the level 9 characters were still going to get to level 10 first, right? Because as a level 7 character becomes 8, now they're still gaining a little bit more experience points, but it's not quite so much. And then by the time they get to level 9, they're getting the same amount of experience point, but the level 9 people that were always level 9 are about to be 10. So the gap doesn't change, but because the experience point gaps do change, eventually everybody kind of eventually catches up. It might take you, 3 or 4 or 5 sessions, but you're not done, Anyways, side tangent from that. So, I think the level lost from dying is a good thing. And I think that it is interesting because let me kind of see if I can describe this here. Okay. So let's really look at this here because I think this is really important. This is really important. Okay. And we're starting to get into like the real meat and potatoes of the game and why I like 3.0. But I don't, I mean, I could just tell you people this, but it's much more cooler if I show you. Okay. So this is the 3rd edition 3.0 player's handbook. This I can't spell QR. S. Oh, it comes before S. All right, here we go. I promise you it'll be worth it. Maybe not. All right, here we go. This is Raise Dead. Okay. This is our first bring somebody back to life spell. It's a cleric 5. All right. It takes a minute to cast. We touch the dead creature and they come back to life and they lose a level. Okay. And they get brought back, but they're pretty messed up, right? They're still going to be pretty damaged, so you might have to heal them up of all types, okay? And, they're pretty messed up. And if they come back, they lose a level. And they have a 50% chance of losing any spell upon being ranged, okay? Now, what does that mean? It means that, let's say your character died with, 20 spells prepared, right? You're a wizard, you're a cleric, you're a, druid. When you get raised, you're going to roll for each of your spells, and each of those spells has a 50% chance of you'll lose the slot for the day. Like you cast it, right? Like you spent the spell. But that should be really interesting to you, because what this tells you, okay, is raised dead, it only takes a minute. And when you get brought back, you lose a level, and your hit points are pretty low, but people can, use spells and stuff to heal you back up, okay? And, you'll get back some of your spell. You might lose some spells, but other than that, you're good to go. This is very different from some of the later games, even Pathfinder 2, where like when you come back from raised dead, your character is bedridden for a week. You have like massive penalties to attack. No, like this, it might take an hour or 2 hours to cast a spell. This is not obviously supposed to be done in combat, but this is a quick post-combat, bring them back. But here's the most damning part, okay? The material component in 3.0 Raised Dead is a diamond worth at least 500 gold pieces. Now, no disrespect to diamonds, 500 gold diamond is a lot. But our characters at this point in the game, should have pretty good access to 500 gold pieces. And in fact, our characters could be lower level than, say, level 9 when you would get access to Raised Dead, but they could still probably pretty easily come up with a 500 GP diamond. All right? We all agree on that? Let's go to 3.5. And this is also true for Pathfinder as well. All right, here's Raised Dead. It's still a minute. They come back. They lose some, they lose a thing. They have 50% chance of losing their spell slots. All right, blah, 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 blah. Everything's the same. Now we need 5,000 gold worth of diamonds. What I posit is that 3.0 was deadlier. Third edition was deadly. Okay? You had monsters that could kill you with a single spell. And certainly 3.0, you had Disintegrate. You had Finger of Death, right? You had all these like nasty spells, right? That could just kill your character. However, in 3.0, it was pretty cheap to get raised from the dead. Okay? Getting a Pathfinder 1 or a 3.5 character, a raised dead, costs 10 times as much money. That's a big deal. It's a big deal for a bunch of reasons. Number one, it's a big deal because it means that even when your characters are that level, suddenly this is a financial cost that you might not be able to really bear. You might not even have that much money. And more importantly, it means if your characters are a little bit lower level, there's no way that they can afford this. So suddenly the game is very deadly still in some ways in 3.5. And Pathfinder 1. They may have tried to make it a little bit less deadly, right, by getting rid of so many of the, instant kill stuff. But, like, 3rd edition is kind of like it's a very rough and tumble game, right? It's a game that hits you really hard and, can kill your character quite easily, but it lets you come back from the dead pretty quickly and easily and cheaply, Now, you do lose a level, right? Permanently, irreversibly, right? It's just gone. But it lets you keep your character, and you get to keep going, and you get to keep playing, and your character will just level up again, right? And the story will keep going. So it's this interesting dynamics. So there's these two conflicting dynamics where it's easy to die, but it's also really easy to come back from death. Means that the game, it feels a little bit, I think it feels a little bit more classic in D&D, where, your characters fail a save and they die, and, but then they come back for revenge. Except, in classic D&D, a lot of times it was like, roll a new character. But in 3rd edition, 3.0, you don't have to do that because getting raised from the dead is pretty cheap. It's almost kind of just like a minor inconvenience. But 3.5 to me marked the transition to a point in a period where death was treated as a really big deal, and like it was a big cost, and it was kind of something that I think made GMs afraid to kill their players. You know, Tim is in chat, and he'll tell you that his very first time playing D&D with us, he made an elf fighter. They were high level. They were in their teens. And he didn't do a really good job of it. He was brand new to the game. And his character died in almost every single encounter. But he continued to play that character. They just kept, you know, getting him raised, and he'd come back, right? And he'd like, you know, he'd gain like two levels or something like that in an encounter. And you know, eventually they were like, okay, you're losing too many levels. We'll spring for a true resurrection, because that is an option when you get to the very highest levels of D&D. You can get a true resurrection and not lose any levels. But I should point out that in 3.0, that's 5,000 GP, but in Pathfinder 2 or Pathfinder 1 or 3.5, it's 25,000. So it's just very, 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 very different costs. And so I think that the monsters and the overall effect of the game is kind of deadlier, but it's also kind of like, I don't want to say it's, I know people, this is crazy because people call 4th edition the MMO. But in, you know, to be fair, in 4th edition, you know, you had high level powers. Like once a day when you die, you come back as an arcane spirit and blow up all your enemies. The thing about 3.0 is there's kind of like an MMO feel to it. Like when you're playing an MMO and you're getting far in a dungeon or a raid and you die, you're not happy about it. You know, you're like, I just wasted that time, and I'm going to have to, all my gear got damaged. I'm going to have to pay money to fix it. But, you know, you're like, but it's just like, you know, damn it. It's kind of like, you know, you miss the, you know, you're trying to make the green light and it turns red. You're not like tilted for the rest of the day. It's not like your car just blew up. You're like, damn it, you know. That's the way death kind of was in 3.0 is, you know, if you're playing like a level 1 or 2 character or whatever, you die. Yeah, you're probably making a new character. But like once you got to like level 3, 4, 5, if someone died, you know, you had access to raise dead. And by the time you started fighting monsters and things that were super scary that could just like straight up kill you, you almost certainly had access to raise dead and resurrection and true resurrection. And that meant that, yeah, you died a lot, but you also came back, and it was cheap and it was easy, and it didn't like debilitate your character, and it didn't bankrupt your character, which is a huge deal. Now, does this mean that, yeah, life is cheap? Yeah, kind of. You know, this idea of like this, you know, kind of more modern RPG with these kind of like, and this is why I get frustrated with D&D 3.5 and D&D 5e and Pathfinder 2 and Pathfinder 1, because they're still based on these same frameworks of this kind of like uncaring deterministic game engine, but they're treated like these epic storyteller generators, and they give this impression to people that their characters are these invincible, immortal heroes. And then it just creates this weird play incentive where GMs are encouraged to fudge, and the rules are encouraged to just constantly coddle your character, because it would be a dick move to just kill your characters all the time. It would make the game unplayable. But in 3.0, it's not as big of a deal. So I think level loss from dying is, you know, kind of an awesome thing. All right. I'm just going to, I said that these were, you know, kind of, these are different items, but technically I'll sort of break them down here. 13. This is more of an example. Okay. Then, don't get me wrong. It annoys me, but I'm using this as sort of an example. The darkness spell. This is just now, of course, number one, this is a classic spell that a lot of monsters have used in D&D. The Dark Mantle, which was introduced in 3rd edition. The Drow, obviously, very famously can drop darkness. And everybody who knows what darkness is, right, knows what it is. If you've read any R.A. Salvatore, you know, a globe of impenetrable darkness, right? Dritz summoned a globe of impenetrable darkness, right? Darkness spell. And I know I keep going back to the PDFs, but it's because seeing is believing. So here we are. We're back in our 3.0 Player's Handbook. And if we go ahead and scroll up to the D's, we look up darkness in our 3rd edition handbook. Now, I understand that this is just one spell, but I'm using this as sort of an example, right, of this kind of philosophy. that has changed between the editions, even though people think it's just like a numerical update. All right, here we go. We found it. Darkness. All right. We touch an object. And for 10 minutes per level, okay, by the way, this is a Bard level 2, Cleric level 2, and a Sorcerer and Wizard level 2 spell. So we have to be level 3 to cast this. A Bard, I think, might have to be level 4. Druids don't get it. It takes one action. We have to touch an object, and it radiates darkness, or it lasts for 10 minutes per level. So it's going to last 30 minutes when we first cast it. And then as we get higher level, it could last an hour, 2 hours. This spell causes an object to radiate darkness out to a 20-foot radius. Not even creatures who can see in the dark, such as with dark vision, can see in an area shrouded in magical darkness. Normal lights, torches, candles, lanterns, and do not work, nor do light spells of a lower level, such as dancing lights or light. In other words, if a level 1 or a cantrip. Darkness and the second level arcane spell daylight cancel each other out. If the spell is cast on a small object that is then placed inside or under a light-proof covering, the spell effects are blocked until the covering is removed. So this is a classic example of spells sort of operating more as technology than as like magical process effects. The idea is that this object is literally like emitting anti-light. So if you put it in like a box or a sack, it can't emit the darkness, if that makes any sense. All right. So that seems pretty reasonable, right? Seems pretty cool. You could easily start to see how, number one, this is very powerful, but it's also very potentially debilitating because you guys can't see either. But then maybe that's a great way to balance the field against you or use it in some other capacity, especially against creatures that have dark vision when you don't have dark vision. So how did they change this in 3.5? Well, I'm glad you asked. Darkness. Same thing, 10 minutes per level. Object touched. Everything seems good here. This spell causes an object to radiate shadowy illumination out to a 20-foot radius. All creatures in the area gain concealment. What this means is that if you cast darkness in a pitch black room, the room will light up. The darkness spell in 3.5 no longer makes things absolute darkness. Instead, it makes everything have concealment. Now, even creatures with dark vision still get this concealment because it's magical darkness. But the point is like now it's literally illuminating shadowy. It's not a globe of darkness. It's just like an effect. Now, why? I don't know. I don't know why they changed this. I can't imagine why they changed this. Maybe it was too broken. Maybe it was too annoying, too powerful. Who knows? But all I know is it's lame. Like, if I cast darkness, I want to be able to, sure, people might notice that there's a big globe of darkness, but they don't see how many people sneak in through the front gate of the castle that we're running into or whatever. At least we have that. Or, some sort of disguise. But instead, if you have darkness in 3.5 or Pathfinder 1, it's like they can see you. Sure, you have a 20% mischance because you're in shadowy illumination, but they can still just totally see you because it actually lights you up. It's so weird. It's so stupid. And it's just one of those little changes that they made to these spells that, to me, it just ruins so much of the fun of these spells. 14, and again, I'm just going to kind of try to go through these quickly here. 14, disintegrate. I think there might be an extra N in there. Disintegrate. Okay, whatever. Disintegrate. In 3.0, disintegrate shot somebody with a green beam. And if they failed to save, guess what happened? They disintegrated. They turned into a pile of dust. Awesome. What does it do in 3.5? It does 2d6 points of damage per level. This is a whole separate side tangent, but I am totally okay at higher levels with us having alternative ways of bypassing the creature's hit points. Because I don't want to sit there. I don't think it's fun for us to sit there and chonk through 350 HP worth of experience. And that's like, but now everybody gets to feel special because we all got to take chunks out of the monster that has infinite pools of hit points. I think it's totally acceptable, totally fine to just hit the enemy, they pop, they explode. Well, what about it's my big bad evil guy? I don't know what to tell you. They were stupid then because they should have been better prepared to not get hit by a disintegrate spell. Or maybe you shouldn't have a big bad evil guy. Or maybe your players just disintegrate him and the game goes on. All I know is that Disintegrate just used to disintegrate you. And then it just started doing damage. And in fact, so many instant kill spells in 3.5 went from being like, fail to save, they die, to they take damage. And I hate that. I think having, one of the ways that you prevent HP bloat is by making it so that these instant kill spells exist. Because now it's not just a question of just chunking through all these hit points. It could be a question of, now don't get me wrong, disintegrate, and it's like we're very high risk, high reward. Because if the enemy passed its save, it essentially took almost no damage, right? I think it took 5d6. It wasn't like save for half. It's like usually it was like a very trivial amount of damage. So if the disintegrate didn't land, it was a big deal, right? But also consider this. Let's hop over to a book that we haven't looked at yet, okay? Because I'm going to take a side tangent here. And I'm going to say 15, 3.5, because I'm talking about spells, began HP and stat bloat. Okay? So why did 3.5 and HP? So what am I talking about here? Let's go over to the monster manual. Here is a monster manual from 3.0 edition. And here we have Oceluth. Okay, for those of you who don't know what an Oceluth is, it's a bone devil, right? Do we have art of the bone devil? Yeah, there we go. That's not the red guy, the kind of bony looking skeleton guy. That's an Oceluth. Okay, so the Oceluth is a CR6 monster. So that means that one Oceluth is a threat, but not like a game ender, but is a reasonable challenge for a party of 4 6th level PCs, which means that reasonably players could be fighting this thing as low levels as 3 or 4. The Oceluth has an armor class of 17 and 32 hit points. Now it does have a damage reduction of 10/+1. So you need to have a +1 better weapon or it's going to take 10 points of damage off. But to put this into comparison, a first level barbarian with a good strength score, raging, and maybe someone's cast magic weapon, because they probably don't have a magic weapon, but let's just for our purposes say that somebody cast magic weapon on our barbarian, and our barbarian rages. Our barbarian could have like a +8 or +9 to hit. Our barbarian, our first level barbarian, raging, needs like an 8 to hit this monster. And if our barbarian crits, that monster is dead. And this is a level 6 monster. Now let's take a look at the Oceluth. Remember, AC 17. 32 hit points. Let's take a look at the Oceluth in 3.5. Here's our Oceluth. 25 AC, 95 hit points. Womp, womp, womp. You see, they started realizing, okay, we need to make these things have more hit points, and they need to have higher armor classes, right? And now you can start to see how in 3.0, it was actually kind of sweet to be a martial character, because in 3.5 now you're going up against the wizard comes in and instant kills this guy, and he's 95 hit points. It would have taken me 3 or 4 rounds to kill this guy. Also, his armor class is 25. But if we hop back to 3.0, this guy's got 32 hit points. Your decent level fight, your 6th level fighter is going to carve this guy up probably in a round, and it's not going to take his highest level spell slot either. He might even be like almost auto hitting this guy. I mean, consider, let's say our 6th level fighter, okay? Our 6th level fighter has a +6 base attack bonus. So they start with 6. Let's say they have an 18 strength from either stats or from a magic item or from a buff spell. So they have another +4. So they have a +10 to hit. They have a magic weapon, +11. They have weapon focus, +12. And maybe there's a bard or a cleric who's buffed them. And so now they have like a +12 or 13. Guess what? Our fighter hits the monster that is their level on a 4. Like, yeah, the fighter's going to, if the fighter goes toe to toe with this thing, it's going to kick this thing's ass. So in 3.5, they gave it 100 hit points. They tripled its hit points and raised its armor class from 17 to 25. So now suddenly our fighter is missing more and needs to hit it 3 times as much. So of course it sucks to be a fighter. I mean, don't get me wrong. Wizards and clerics and stuff were broken in 3rd edition. I'm not going to try to say that they're not. But they made it way worse than 3.5. They made all the monsters way tougher. They gave them way more hit points. They gave them way more stats. And it just became a slog fest. So, not a fan. One of my favorite examples from third edition is, or from 3.0, I should say, is everybody's, the Mind Flayer. This is kind of an example of this game. This thing is a CR8. Okay? And its treasure is double standard, which means that it's kind of a badass, right? Like you're getting more treasure for fighting this thing. So even though it's a CR8, the game is basically saying we understand this guy's tough, and rightfully so. He has this ability to shoot out a mind blast, right? And that mind blast is a cone, 60 feet long. Anyone who makes a save, anyone who fails the will save, DC 17, is stunned for 3d4 rounds. It's almost like a AoE party wipe. So rightfully so. This guy's level CR8, by the way. CR8. Challenge rating 8. Made for level 8 parties. Its armor class is 15. Why? Because look at him. He's a bag of rubber. He's an octopus in a robe. Why would his armor class be 27 or some shit? He's a freaking squid man in a fucking rubbery robe. Yeah, he's easy to hit. He's dangerous and deadly, but if you surprise this guy, you're going to kill him in 1 round. Your rogue is just going to come in and go, psh, psh, psh. Well, yeah, but I mean, he has 195 hit points. No, he has 44 hit points. Your barbarian is going to if your barbarian gets into melee with this guy, good night. It's over, And I love that. This is tension. You want to talk about boring combats where it's they have 300 hit points. We have 150 hit points. They really can't hit us. We can't hit them, but it's just kind of attrition until eventually we grind them out. A fight against this Mind Flayer, man, it's do or die. It's coin flip in some ways. And I get it. That can be very disheartening for some people, but look at the good news. If you die, it's cheap to get raised. So anyways, this is where the hit point bloat and all this other nonsense really started beginning. And I think that was a real problem. So we talked about Disintegrate. We talked about Darkness. All right. Just real quick. I'm going to highlight some specific spells, and I'm not going to open them up because it's getting kind of late. Fly spell. Classic D&D spell. All right. It used to last in 3.0. It lasted 10 minutes per level. In 3.5, it lasts 1 minute per level. 17. Polymorph. You get to turn yourself into a cool monster. You turn yourself into a bear. You could turn yourself into a alligator or something. In 3.0, it lasts 10 minutes per level. In 3.5, it lasts 1 minute per level. Okay? 18. The buff spells. Okay? So I'm talking about, Bull's Strength, Cat's Grace, right? Eagle's Splendor, right? The strength buff spell, the dex buff spell, the con buff spell, the int spell, right? These spells increased your strength stat scores, all right? In 3.0, they lasted 1 hour per level. In PF1, I think they were 1 minute per level. And in 3.5, they may have been 1 minute per level, actually. I know they were in thing. Let's take a look here. Bull's Strength. We're in 3.5 here. Bear's Endurance. Yep, 1 minute per level. So this is 3.5 as well. Now, why am I writing these all down here? This is because, and I could go deeper than this, but I wrote down a bunch more here. But those are sort of the major ones. Okay, why? This is the difference between a strategic game versus a tactical game. The number one, there is some sort of inherent psychological bias that when your characters prepare for a dungeon expedition, when your characters prepare to go on the adventure, and they cast a bunch of these spells before going in, I'm telling you, it immediately makes your characters much more liable to take multiple counters per day, because they go, well, yeah, but I still got 50 minutes of my fly spell left. I still have, I get to be a bear for another hour, right? My buff spells are going to be lasting for the better part of the day. But the other thing about it is it's about the group, like at the, literally at the beginning of the session, but also like at the beginning of the adventuring day, the group getting together and deciding what spells do we need? What spells do we want to, have available for us? What spells do we want to have up? Because that is going to be the deciding factor for what we handle today. If we know that we're going to need flight spells, well, then let's get them cast in advance rather than having to cast them, and then they're only going to last for the fight. Because now, when that spell is over, when that fight's over, suddenly you're like, well, yeah, but now I'm down my fly spell. You're like, I'm going to cast these buffs before we go into the fight. So you cast fly, and you cast bull strength, and you cast cat's grace on the rogue and the fighter and the stuff. And you get 2 fly spells, one on the fighter, one on the rogue. And then you cast a bull strength on the fighter, and you cast a cat's grace on the rogue. And then you guys go into that fight, and that spell lasts 8 minutes. So basically it lasts for the fight, And then after the fight's done, you're like, well, damn, I'm down 4 spell slots. I guess we could do another fight. And then you're down another 4 or 5 spell slots. And then you go, let's go home and rest for the day. Versus planning out for the rest of the day what you're going to have, or at least for a good, huge chunk of it. Additionally, when you have buffs that last for a very long period of time, it's much easier and much more worth it to do the little bit of math that requires. In fact, if you go back to our character sheet, your character sheet even has a section in it for temporary modifiers, right? So the game was sort of basically like, look, your character's going to have like a temporary strength score. And if it's for one fight, it's probably not worth writing down. But when the wizard goes, hey, by the way, I'm level 6, this spell is going to last 6 hours, then essentially it's kind of like saying, unless something really crazy happens and we end up getting stuck here, or we end up having a really long day at work, you're going to have this buff all day. So it's worth it for you to sort of do the math and calculate, okay, everything's +2 higher, because it's going to be around for a long time. But it also means that, like I said, you can go and make plans. You can figure out what you need. So like if we go down to element OPQ, if we go down to, let's say, protection should work here. Protection from elements. You have to pick an element when you cast this spell. But it gives them basically gives them an absorbative shield of 12 points per caster level. So if you're a 10th level caster, you give that player a 120 point absorbing shield, but you have to pick one energy element, right? You have to pick fire or lightning or electricity or acid, right? But it lasts 10 minutes per level. If our character is level 10, this is going to last 100 minutes. It's going to last almost 2 hours. So we can cast this spell well in advance of the fight. This is how random encounters don't fuck us. This is how preparing, hey, we know we're going to go fight a Bahir, and we know that a Bahir has lightning breath. Cool, cleric, hell, at this level, maybe the ranger casts the spell on you. Could be the druid or the wizard, but it could also be the ranger. Dividing up the duties between the rest of the party members, making sure everybody has what they need. That, to me, that sort of party planning phase is awesome. Now, I get it. Pathfinder 2, people talk about this. The game requires tactical coordination of the players. It does, and I think that's really cool. I think that's really awesome. But I think 3rd edition, especially 3.0, because of these buffs spells and these spells like Fly and Polymorph, which lasted a long time, encouraged a strategic approach to play that I think overall is missing in sort of the more modern versions of the game. So now, again, I said I had like 20, but I'll keep a couple of them. But there's some little minor ones too, like 3.5 was also created to sell minis. In 3.0, you had creatures that were large, but were like, they took up this many squares. You had creatures that were large that only took up a single square, but they were really tall, like an ogre. And they still had 2 squares of reach. But you had large creatures like maybe, I don't know, like a lion that took up 2 squares horizontally, but their reach was only 5 feet. This gave the game subtler nuance. It's no coincidence that 3.5 edition came out, and literally that same year, the D&D minis line came out, and they standardized all large creatures to be a 10-foot by 10-foot square that had a standard reach of 10 feet. Now, some people might like this. Some people may not like this. I personally don't like it. The game just became much more focused, I think, around miniatures. The rule book became much more focused around miniatures, and minis are sweet. I bought a shitload of them. I love them. But, it did create a reliance on the game to need miniatures. All right. So we'll finish with a number 20, maybe my hottest take. 3.0 was ivory tower design. Now, for those of you who don't know what ivory tower design means, it is the idea that some of the choices in the game are good, and some of the choices in the game are okay, and some of the choices in the game are bad. And that part of the fun of playing the game is figuring that out and learning how to get good at the game. When I grew up with my cousin and I was playing D&D and my uncle and his group, I looked at those people like with awe, because the skill of the game was all in the sort of player and their wiliness and their dungeon. Bob sees this all the time with Smith. Hearing for those special contexts. This is a time and a place, AD&D, right, where there was no like skills and skill checks and stuff like that. But you had a smart player who would be like, wait a second, the GM described that corridor a little bit strangely. Hold on, I'm thinking there's a trap. I just sense it. And then it turns out there's a pit trap. And like the new guys, like me, I'm like, oh my God, look at this guy. This guy's so good. He's so good at D&D. Right? And there was this idea that you could be good at a game. Well, 3rd edition D&D was still, especially 3.0, was still part of that idea or mantra that there was a skill to this game. Now, in 3rd edition, some of that changed from, being able to read your GM and kind of, pick out the context clues, to some of it was understanding, hey, this is a strong feat, or this is a cool spell, and this isn't. And I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. I think rewarding players for investing and getting good at the game is a good thing. And I think that I understand it can create problems, and I can understand that it can create, inequities between players in a group. I think this is a much bigger problem when you're talking about wide-scale organized play divisions or groups of people who are mostly strangers or maybe not as familiar with one another. But by and large, within a group of close acquaintances, I don't think it's a bad thing. And I think, to a certain degree, the internet kind of ruins some of this, because people could just go online and read, oh, toughness sucks. But I think figuring out this process is worth something. And I think it made people feel like I think that's part of the reason why so many people didn't want to go to 4th edition. I know that a lot of people said, oh, because it was a video game and I didn't like it, whatever. I think the truth is they felt like, man, I've put a lot of work and skill and hours into this game, and I don't want to abandon all that to go play some new game where I don't know what the fuck is happening. And I've been told that the game is sort of like super balanced. And it kind of really doesn't matter whether you make a good choice or a bad choice. There are no bad choices. There are no good choices. There are only choices. And I think a lot of people heard that and said, I'm going to go play this instead. Because if there was ever a game that rewarded you for making good choices in car hopping, it was Pathfinder, first edition. So, and then of course this created the problem where then GM said, "Oh, my players are so broken, I can't possibly challenge them, and my big bad evil guys keep dying," right? And this created a whole mess of problems. But and then GMs thought, "Oh, I gotta create a monster with 5,000 hit points and stuff like that." And the scales and the numbers went up. And then we got to Pathfinder Second Edition, where they said, "Okay, we're just gonna make everybody the same." That's great. I think that 3.5, 4th edition, 5th edition, maybe. Certainly Pathfinder 2. I think that they are better balanced games, especially in their rules, involving players. But I do think so they're better, so from a combat as sport, from a game perspective, like a board game where you want it to be balanced and fair and everybody has a fair chance. They are better in that context. However, I think 3.0 is much more flavorful. I think the cool, deadly abilities of the monsters that you think should do what they're going to do. The Banshee's yell kills you. The Medusa turns you to stone, right? The bite of the cockatrice petrifies you, right? These things are scary. They're dangerous. When the shadowy, when the vampire touches you, your character loses negative energy levels and dies, right? The shadow, the wraith, they drain your strength or your con away until you're dead. It's scary, the game is much more, it's more flavorful. It's more deadly. So it's a little bit more true to that kind of past history of D&D. But it is modern facing, and it made coming back from the dead easy, and it made it gave you a lot of cool choices to make, feats and cool character abilities. If you look at some of the AD&D character classes, they're boring as hell. They didn't get anything. I'll be the first to admit that. OSR is really cool, but some of those OSR characters are just boring as shit. That they are. They're just boring. There's nothing there. There's no meat on the bones. It's fun to get cool little widgets and wivers. Now, of course, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, at a 20th level character, we'll have something like 45 or something, 50 feats. Maybe that's too many, 3rd edition, you got 6 or 7, and you had a handful of class abilities, depending on what class you are. And of course, if you're a spellcaster, you had your spells. To me, that feels much more, reasonable. So, so I think that, 3.0 was ultimately the more fun game that encouraged a strategic mindset due to the way that the spells and the durations worked. I think that the game was deadlier, but also at the same time, and in some ways more punishing, but also more rewarding because, you could make your own magic items, but it cost you something. It wasn't just a freebie. You could die, but then you could get brought back from the dead really easily and at a low cost. So I really, really like that. You could multi-class, but if you did it stupidly or foolishly, you got a penalty. So the game let you do stuff, but it also punished you. It wasn't afraid to reward and to punish. And that was kind of, I think, what made the game so great. So again, specifically, we'll go over this. So no weird weapon sizes. You didn't have small and medium long swords. Everything was just the same size. No pokey mounts for paladins. Paladins didn't pop their horses in and out of an extra dimensional pocket dimension. Rangers in 30.5 had a D8 hit die, and that was a crime against humanity. Range combat was really tough, and there was a chance that you could hit friendly fire, which meant that range combat wasn't just the default, de facto, the best option. Not to mention the part we said about the magic items. Damage reduction was handled much better and didn't require the golf bags full of different items that, I got my adamantine this and my coal iron this and my silver this. 3.5 was a blatant cash grab because they needed to make more money after they got bought by Hasbro. This is more generically 3rd edition, but flat-footed and touch AC is a really good system. Taking 20 is a really good thing. Items were more vulnerable. In a way, it was kind of like you. right? The modern day concept of this character who wields this insanely unique item, and then, the idea that a GM would blow up that character's item is almost unthinkable in a modern day RPG. Reasonably, the character could not function, right? The character could not function if they didn't have their weapon. They wouldn't be able to hit anything. Half of their class abilities would turn off. It would be a disaster. But in 3.0, sure, that stuff could happen, but it also wasn't a huge disaster. I mentioned this before, but I'll kind of append this. I said numbers go burr, but the math is flat. So everybody is fairly familiar with this, right? So in like PF2, okay, like you're adding your level to to your attacks, but the monsters are adding your level to their AC. Okay, so your numbers go up, but their numbers go up. Okay, fair enough. Now, in 5e, we don't add level, and, your proficiency bonus starts at +2, and it goes to +6. And, your strength score might start at a 16 and end up at a 20. So, you might gain, you might gain a magic item or something like that. So, maybe you gain +8 or +9 to your attack roll. I'm not the 5e expert here, but you're going to add that. But by and large, I don't know all the 5e monsters, but from what I remember from the monster manual, the monsters, typically started off with ACs in like 13 to 17, and some of the higher CR rating ones were like, I don't know, like 15 to like 20, 22, 23, 24. So your numbers didn't really go up that much, but the monsters' armor classes didn't really go up that much either. And then we talk about 3.x. Now, if you're a fighter or a barbarian or a ranger in 3rd edition, you get +1 to hit every level. It's called your base attack bonus. You also get your strength and you get all your other buffs. But guess what? The ACs, so in that way, it's like PF2. But the monsters' armor classes, they're like 5e, where early monsters might have ACs of 10 to 15. And we were looking at some of those late game monsters. We were looking at CR8. There was a CR8 that had an AC of 15. Level 8. Do you realize that if your fighter was level 8, they would have an 8 base attack bonus? Let's say that they have an 8 base attack bonus. They have a 4 strength. They have 1 from weapon focus. They have a 2 from their magic item, from their sword. And maybe they have a +1 from a buff spell, from a friendly buff spell. Your fighter at level 8 has a 12, 13, 14... 12, 13, 14, 15. They have a +16 to hit with their weapon against the Mind Flayer, whose AC is 15. You have a 95% chance of hitting. In fact, 3rd edition, hey, Vin is here. I'm at work, but 3rd edition, etc. Awesome. Heck yeah. And I know you're a big fan of 3rd edition as well. Vin, thank you so much. I'm glad you were able to stop in. I'd love to see what you think of this. And then the numbers go burr. So let me quickly kind of contrast this before we go. Yes. And let me talk about the numbers go burr, because it's something very important to note here. In 3rd edition, I didn't even really get into this, but in 3rd edition, when you get your base attack bonus to +6, you get a second attack at -5. So that means that if a fighter gets to make a full, our 8th level fighter could actually, if they wanted to, if they could make 2 attacks. They could make one at +16, and then they could make their next attack at +11, right? It's 5 lower than the one before it. And eventually, as they get higher in level, they can make a 3rd attack at -10. But here's the difference. So this sounds very similar, right? Look at the difference between these. It's 5. What else does that remind you of? It reminds you of PF2 map, right? It reminds you of PF2 multiple attack penalty. The difference is that in Pathfinder 2nd edition, the monster's armor classes are balanced to your character's first attack. That means that your character's first attack is what their armor class is scheduled to make up against. So by the time you're making a map attack at -5 or a map attack at -10, you are essentially swinging for the fences, oftentimes. But in 3rd edition, it's opposite. That first attack, that one's almost like a given, right? That one's almost like an automatic hit. It's the second attack or the third attack that is like kind of what the monster's armor class is sort of quote unquote balanced against, even though it's not really balanced against anything. And so what this means is that as a martial character, it's not really a question of am I going to hit? It's how many times am I going to hit? And it means that even if your character only quote unquote gets to make one attack roll that turn, you're probably going to hit. Especially when we looked at 3.0 and we saw how in 3.5, they bumped up the armor classes of some of these monsters by 5-6 points. In 3.0, monsters had lower armor classes, and I was all for it because it made the marshals be able to kick ass, and I thought it was really, really cool. Increasing the monster's armor class doesn't do anything except make mages and clerics more powerful, because increasing their armor class doesn't increase their touch AC, and it doesn't help their saving throws. So now, and they tripled the hit points. So like 3.5 was a disaster for the martial characters and anybody who wanted to be a martial character. So yeah, I mean, I think that in that respect, I mean, I think it's really, really interesting. So anyways, let's see here. What are your feelings of PF1 in comparison? So PF1 basically is like 3.5 on steroids. My main problem with Pathfinder 1 is you got a lot of feats. The character classes, I actually don't like capstone abilities, because capstone abilities kind of make you feel bad for multiclassing. And I do think multiclassing is really cool. I will say the characters are much more complicated. You know, like a barbarian in Pathfinder, I don't know if we'll be able to see this, but a barbarian in Pathfinder gets an ability. It's not always like, you know, an active cool ability. Sometimes it's just improving, you know, your DR your damage reduction improves from 1 to 2. But you know, most of the character classes get something at every level. That is not a bad thing. I will admit that. You know, leveling up is cool, but I know this sounds stupid, but this is something I have learned from OSR. And one of the reasons why even though I know I don't like OSR in the sense that like I want to play that full time as my only job, my only game, there is something that is kind of compelling about this idea that you kind of don't care if you level up. It doesn't make that big of a difference. And I know that sounds weird, but when something isn't that cool, it means that you're not like, this is what the game is about. Like if we look at the Barbarian from 3.0, you know, they start off with their rage and they get their extra fast movement. Eventually they pick up uncanny dodge, and, you know, that improves a couple times. And then they eventually get damage reduction, and it keeps scaling, and they get more rages per day. But there's plenty of levels where you don't really get a whole lot of anything. And maybe all you're getting is, you know, an extra point of damage reduction. It's not like the coolest thing in the world, right? And so paradoxically, it means that you kind of don't care if you level. It kind of doesn't matter. And also remember, we just looked, the Mind Flayer has an AC of 15. Our Barbarian can hit that easily at level 1. So is having more base attack bonus really going to make that big of a difference? No, not really. And sure, we'll have more hit points, but not that many more hit points. And the game has full of things that can instantly kill us, like save or die spells, or if we get negative energy levels equal to our level, or if our constitution gets drained to 0, or if we, I'm forgetting one. Negative energy levels, save or die, and constitution drained to 0, which, you know, scary monsters, or we could be petrified, or any of these other instant kills. So having more hit points, you know, it doesn't really matter. Oh, but our AC, no, it doesn't. Your AC is determined by what armor you're wearing. Sure, we get more base attack bonus, but we're already hitting. So in a certain sense, leveling up doesn't matter as much. And in a way, I think Dan is saying it the way I would want to say it. You play to level, you know, you play to level up versus you level up to play. And that's an interesting way to look at it, right? Like, you know, levels are so significant and they're such a big thing. You know, people talk about all the time. You hear about this all the time. You know this. You know you're guilty of it. Not saying you specifically, Whipple. I'm just saying people out there. My build comes online at level 7. What the fuck does that mean? Like, I know what it means, but like, that is such a weird, toxic, strange way to approach TTRPGs. I think that's just terrible. And it sets you up in this weird place where you're like, I only care about leveling. My character doesn't even function until I get to level 7. And I think I don't think that's a good thing. And so in a weird way, for me, I think the reason why 3.0 is now don't get me wrong, 3.0 also has, I've said this before, it has its warts. But one of the things that I really like about it is it's still old school in ways that people don't really appreciate. But it has enough, hey, you get some cool choices, you get to make a couple of interesting decisions, you get to add some of these cool feats, as opposed to old school where it's just like you have nothing and you can do nothing. And it introduced the skill system and the DC system. Remember, before 3rd edition, basically anything that your character wanted to do, it was kind of up to what the GM, in Powered by the Apocalypse terms, in earlier versions of D&D, everything that you did was basically a GM move. And the GM would just decide, yeah, that works. I don't know, make a roll a d20, and if you roll under your strength score, that works. I don't know, we'll say that has a 35% chance of succeeding. Roll D percentage dice and see if you succeed. All of those were totally valid ways for the GM to interpret anything that you were saying. 3rd edition gave the players a little bit more of a framework to say, this is what my character can do. I understand how DCs work, and now the GM and I can kind of speak a similar language. So in Powered by the Apocalypse terms, this is like creating moves, player-facing moves, that give the players a little bit more incentive to this as well. We got another super chat from the self-confessed cynic. Sounds like 3 greater than 3.5 was only partly due with balance, but mostly actually to do with a change in the author's intent. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there was an authorial, there was definitely an intent there, a change towards moving towards sort of this new postmodern view of D&D. Case in point, when 3.0 came out, there was no Lord of the Rings film. When 3.5 came out, Return of the King had just come out. So, maybe like, I'm not saying that that's what caused it, but like, I think it maybe changed the way that people interact with fantasy. I don't know. I want to hear you discuss that modifiers don't matter. It's just a number on the D20 that you're trying to roll. Modifiers and numbers getting bigger obfuscates that reality that's only D20. I'm not sure I understand, Dan. I want to hear you discuss that modifiers don't matter. Well, I don't know if this is exactly what you were talking about, but this is something else I wanted to highlight. And, people who know about some of my issues with Pathfinder 2 will understand this right away. The other thing about 3.0 is, you could put in a skill point, right, every level into a skill. And so by level 10, you could have 10 skill points in it. That gave you a plus 10. Plus you could have a stat, which was like, 20, and you have a 15. And you might have, I don't know, an item that gave you a plus 3 bonus. And you might have a skill synergy that gave you another plus 2, right? And suddenly your character has a plus 20 in some skill. But a lot of the DCs in the game were like 15 and like 20. The game didn't have leveled DCs. The DC of something was just what the DC was. So what this meant is you didn't have to max out a skill in order to just be pretty damn good at it. And I think there were a lot of people who were just, I don't know, because they were just trolls and silly and young, they're like, I want to get a plus 40 in my stealth. And you can, but honestly, it doesn't really matter past a certain point. And having that high, but my player always passes his skill check. Yeah, he's a high level rogue. Like that's what he's going to do. I don't know. He can't sneak up on somebody with tremor sense or blind sight. Can he? No, unless he's doing something else. In that case, cool. He figured it out, And I like that the players can approach the game that way. Sure, they can put all their points into these skills and become really, really high at it. But for the most part, it just doesn't matter because you only need to really get, DC 15, DC 20, DC 25, maybe tops for most of the checks in D&D 3.0. The same thing's true, by the way, of armor classes. I think most of the armor classes in the game, until you get to the very highest levels, are like, less than 30. In most cases, probably the majority of them less than 25. Rem says, I think the epic level supplement had DCs for epic heroes, and DC 40 swim was like can swim up a waterfall. I actually do remember that. I don't remember if it was DC 40 Rems, but that is actually pretty funny. Now that Rems called it out, let me see if I can find it real quick. Boom. Got the epic level handbook. Let's take a look here. And these things were so ridiculous. It didn't even it didn't even matter, right? I mean, here we go. Swim. Okay, here we go. Swim. Okay. It is DC 80 rems. It is really difficult. That's to swim up a vertical waterfall. It was 80. It wasn't 40, but it was still reasonable. The fact that they even had this. So, those kind of skills. I mean, but my point is, it's ridiculous because at that point you're like literally a god. I mean, come on. 3.0 was game design. 3.5 was a money grab. In some ways, yes. Monty Cook himself said that 3.5 was designed to make money. It was always kind of part of their plan. They were going to release a new edition. And when Hasbro bought Wizards of the Coast, they said, all right, now that time is now. We want, if we release a new edition, we just bought this company. We want to sell books. The combination of DCs and roll plus mod is what these games are about. Usually only focus on the roll for getting DCs. Absolutely. And that's the key. That's one of the most important parts is the GM really sets the tone of the game. Now there's tables and there's lookups so that you can sort of have a reference. But by setting DCs, the GM is really setting the tone of their game. And the DMG talks about the DM's best friend. And the DM's best friend is give the player a +2, -2, or a +5, -5 if they have a great idea, or a bad idea, or a really good idea, or a horrible idea. And then also look at the DC and increase the DC by 2 or 5, or reduce the DC by 2 or 5 if the essential nature of the task is harder or easier. And so that way you're kind of looking at like, what is the character doing and what is the world doing? And then once we evaluate those two things, now we know what the percent chance is. Now it's not as clear cut, as something like a, D100 skill-based system where you go, I know I'm 73% to make this check. But it's the same basic concept. Correct. You aren't actually leveling up. You're always trying to get you're always trying to roll an 8 or higher to hit if you're like a fighter, or 10 or higher if you're not a fighter. You get more abilities and doodads. You get more class feats and stuff like that. And you get more horizontal opportunities, but you're not actually getting tougher or stronger. So that is third edition, and why I think it is, for me. Now, granted, like I said, Derek, so every game you play is third edition? No, the game is, it's got a lot of simulationist crunchy rules. It can be kind of a pain to make monsters. They're not exactly the easiest things in the world to make. But I should also point out that when I was playing third edition, I was also really worried about balance, more so than I would be nowadays. So now it's kind of weird, but I kind of think of 3.0 as sort of being like old school. And I kind of think of 3.5 and Pathfinder 1 as being new school. So for me, the divide of old school really stopped at 3.0. I know that seems strange, but there's so much in 3.0 that still had the DNA from those earlier versions of the game, the instant death spells and all this other stuff. But they did put stuff in there to make the game easier to live through. And they made things like the Raise Dead cheaper, and one thing that Smith has talked about before is like, if you die in Pathfinder 2 and you want to get a Raise Dead, it's so expensive. It will cost you like all of your gold. You might even have to sell magic items, but you need those magical items to even function in the game. So now your character can't even play the game that you're trying to play. So it's easier, So for me, however, the standout thing about 3.0 is Old Haste. So the reason for me 3.0 is better than 3.5 is Old Haste. For those of you who don't know, Old Haste in third edition, Old Haste gave one player, one target, for one round a level, an extra action on their turn. So instead of getting one standard action, you got two, basically. And this was huge. But more importantly, it meant that a spellcaster could cast 2 spells a turn. And in 3.5, they completely changed haste. Haste basically made you move a little faster, and it gave everybody an extra attack if you made a full attack, which wasn't that great. Give you like a +1 to your AC, and it was an AoE. But it did almost nothing for casters. Now, why is that such a big thing for me? Well, number one, haste was definitely a tactical spell. It wasn't a spell that you could just fire and forget and just keep it up on somebody all day. So I liked that about haste, right? It was a very powerful effect, and rightfully so. But, and this was actually something that was very sad to us when we were playing 5th edition. We were really enjoying 5th edition, and then after we were finished with the campaign, we realized that we were cheating the whole time. One of the things that I loved about 3.0 was that casters could get hasted, and they could cast 2 spells around. And that meant that they could, cast a protection spell and throw a fireball. It meant that they could heal somebody and, cast a flame strike. That was really rewarding to me. Now, at this time, in 3rd edition, we didn't have things like bonus actions or minor actions. And when we got to 4th edition really introduced this idea of minor actions and standard actions. But minor actions were usually pretty minor stuff. So when we were playing 5th edition D&D, Smith especially, he had a cleric fighter, and we were casting spells all the time. He would cast a bonus action spell, like that bonus action heal spell, and then he would use his spell to cast, some spell. What we didn't know, and we thought that was awesome. In fact, we talked about how it felt like old 3.0, and it felt like old 3.0 haste, where casters could, kind of let loose. But we didn't know that 5th edition is you can only cast a bonus spell, and then the other spell has to be a cantrip. We didn't know that. So when we were having all sorts of fun with playing 5th edition, it was illegal. But in 3.0, it was really cool. I should also point out that it was a really powerful thing to cast on your melee characters, because giving them that extra partial action standard action meant that they could move and still have a full round action, which meant that they could move and make all their attacks. So it made them very, very powerful. And so it was a really cool spell and was really powerful. And it was only 3rd level. So there was this idea that stuff could, really stack up, and you could, kind of customize the party's strengths. And there was always, give me haste, give me haste, give me haste. But it felt cool to have this thing that legitimately felt powerful. And I liked that, and everybody liked that. And it was cool to be that kind of super powered character. I don't know, maybe it should have had a little bit more of a price paid to it. I don't know. Maybe it should have cost XP or something to cast just so it wasn't so ubiquitous, but it was a really fun spell. And we had very fond memories of 3.0 haste. And I remember always being very sad when 3.5 came out. And, haste was still great in Pathfinder 1 and 3.5. It was still they're very much worth casting, but it was nowhere near as good as the old haste. Let's see. AK says, it kind of depends in 2nd edition how the GM sets up the world. Like, you can out-level enemies, but you're ideally always facing bigger threats, which does lead to that treadmill experience. Absolutely, AK. In fact, in Pathfinder 2nd edition, if you went and fought lower-level enemies, if the world didn't level up with you, you would clean their clocks, right? You would be like, every attack would be a critical hit. It would be almost a joke. You would kind of kick their ass, Didn't one of the older versions of haste age you a year every time you use it? Yes, Daniel. Haste in AD&D, 1st and 2nd edition, when it was cast on the target aged magically a year. So don't get too many hastes if you're a human. You'll quickly die of old age. Anyways, I have just some fantastic memories playing 3rd edition D&D. I grew up playing 2nd edition and Earth Dawn and Dragonlance 5th Age with some of my oldest friends, including Smith. But so many of my some of my dearest and closest friends, I didn't really meet them until, the early 2000s. And I met them primarily through playing 3rd edition. And this was the edition, like I said, we graduated high school. Aaron got his own apartment. I was in college. We had all this free time. We were Aaron was working. He had money. I had my student loans and my credit card debt that I was running up. So I had money. I was working a little bit. It was a lot of fun for us to be playing this game so much. And, those, call it 7 years of 3rd edition, including 3.5, were only 7 years before 2008 when 4th edition came out. Easily the most RPG system I've played the most ever, because we were playing 2 or 3 times a week. We were playing for 5 or 6 hours each session. So you were talking about almost like a part-time job. It was like we were probably playing 3rd edition close to 20 hours a week. I mean, maybe that's an exaggeration, but I mean, it was 15 easily. And there was definitely a week where it was 20. There are some adventures that we played in one weekend. You know, it was like a 10-hour session followed by like an 11-hour session, and then we would complete the adventure. That would literally take me now a year to play. You know, most of our sessions now 3 to 4 hours, and we're lucky if we can play once or twice a month. So, you know, yeah, that would almost take me at least half a year. We used to sometimes knock that out in one weekend. So, you know, for me, there's a lot of nostalgia tied up in this game. It was a game changer. It changed the industry, whether you want to admit it or not. I mean, everything about this OGL and all this other stuff came back to this edition. So to me, 3.0 will always be sort of my edition. Now, as Boothby so eloquently puts here, 3rd edition, my favorite version of the game that will never run again. That is kind of really the dilemma. I love this game, but it's kind of like, I don't know. It's kind of not really the same because, you know, I enjoy playing Final Fantasy 1, but, you know, like it's like going back to trying to play like old Nintendo games that don't have a save feature, and, you know, you have to beat the game in one whole fell swoop, and you're like, that's just not conducive to the way that I live my life anymore. It's still a great game and I love it, but ain't nobody got time for that. So that's kind of where I am in some ways with 3rd edition. It is a great game, but it also is a game that, you know, had its time and had its place, you know. And yeah, if I had 15 to 20 hours per week with my friends, it would absolutely be the game for me. But, you know, there's a desire in me to sort of get the most juice for my squeeze every time I get a game. And unfortunately, that can lead to some biased and some potentially bad decisions as well. So yeah. Yeah, I mean, Derek, I mean, that's an amazing, I mean, that's just such an awesome thing, right? Where it's like, you know, you just show up and you just assume that some people are playing. You know, I mean, that was literally like, we would be at work or I'd be like at school or whatever, you know, and I'd get like I'd get like an AOL or an ICQ ping or whatever it was at the time. And, you know, someone would be like, hey, we're all meeting up, we're meeting at Smith's around 6, you know, can you be there? And it's like, yeah. I think we're going back to level 3. Oh shit. Okay. Yeah, I'll try to be there. You know, it was like, it felt like you were the adventurer. I don't know. I mean, some of it, again, there's nostalgia caught up in this. I cannot deny that. But yeah, love it. I mean, again, there's something 3rd edition I don't like. We never liked prestige classes. We didn't use them. I think, again, all that time I was talking about playing, I think like 3 or 4 people ever took prestige classes. We didn't like them, by and large. We mostly stayed away from the splat books, you know, for the most part. You know, I think the core games were totally fine. There were some good books that came out for 3.5, and there were some really cool ideas, but by and large, you know, we just kind of played it straight up, and that I think is a great game. So that's going to do it for me tonight. I want to say thank you to everybody for hanging out. Thank you to the patrons for supporting and showing up and giving some love. Quick shout out to some of our fine folks who showed up today. We had gave us some extra love. Self-Confessed Cynic gave us several super chats. Thank you, Self-Confessed Cynic. Lollipop Anonymous, which was Dr. Metropolis, and Duncan DT with some tips. So really appreciate that. You know, gotta love the support for, you know, a 24-year-old game. And why my defense of why I think it was the best version of 3.5 or 3.x. So anyways, I have no idea what's in store for later in the week, but, you know, as always, you know, if you're interested in talking with us, hanging out with us, talking about RPGs, reminiscing, or playing RPGs, from old stuff to new stuff, maybe come check us out. There's a link in the description below, patreon.com/nightsoflastcall. You can join up and hang out with us on our awesome private Discord server where we got lots of cool games going on and fun conversations and lots of cool stuff if you're into RPGs. Thanks, Pathfinder. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Jackal, thank you for hanging out here. A Wizard Wild Mage. Nice. The highest level character I ever played. No, the highest level character I think I ever played was well, I know my 5th edition Bard got to 20th. And oh, my Pathfinder 2 Fighter, my Pathfinder 2 Cleric got to 20th. Yeah, I didn't really play a lot. Like a lot of the 3rd edition I played, like I didn't make it to 20. Like I was mostly the DM, but I don't know if I got to a 20th level character in 3rd edition. Hell yeah, that is awesome. Although I will say, middle of a game, replace TTRPG also with Euchre, and you will have also described my my college experience pretty well there. Anyways, so if you're a patron, I look forward to hanging out with you and talking with you. If you're going to join the Patreon, I look forward to hanging out and talking with you in the future. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on Knights of Last Call. Good night, everybody.